A guy in knight's armor, with a bright cloak that inspired greatness in front of the monsters. A huge bunch of goblins ran towards him, while he calmly stood and waited. He chuckled, thinking that 2,000 warriors was too small a number to estimate the power of his kingdom. The thought that his opponents underestimated him only fueled his cold determination. The young commander looked around at his warriors, searching their eyes for an answer to the question of whether they thought the same. He saw how they clutched their weapons, and he knew they thought the same as he did. He threatened the monsters that they would show them all their strength and power. He points his hand forward, giving the command to go forward, with proud words that they will show what they are capable of. Tactics Chronicle is a fourth-generation virtual reality game, RPG, with management elements and a kingdom, RPG. The game became rapidly popular, as it stood out from other monotonous games. In addition, the game was of high quality, but conveyed the setting of a fantasy world. The young man, who had just plunged into virtual reality, gazed with admiration at the vast, mind-boggling world that lay before him. As soon as he found himself in the game, he saw the endless expanses of the Golden Steppe, and the next moment he felt a gentle breath of wind and the fresh, spicy aroma of herbs. His eyes were burning with irrepressible curiosity. He greedily absorbed every detail of this unfamiliar, mysterious world, clenched his fists from the excitement that filled him, and shone like a star. Without a second's hesitation, the boy rushed forward, enthusiastically exclaiming that this was where his great journey began, and swore that he would build a powerful empire that would conquer all lands. After a long time of playing, he can go out on the balcony in front of his people, the kingdom, which, after a long period of time, has become powerful. All the people turned their attention to the king who came out to meet them. He stood majestically on the marble balcony of the royal palace, casting a cold, appraising glance over his subjects, like a deity looking down on mortals from unattainable heights. The air shook with the deafening roar of the command. The troops instantly lined up in perfect ranks, froze in respectful silence, for before them stood not just a military leader, but the ruler himself. The whole crowd began to shout loudly, also loudly and majestically greeting their great ruler. Coming a little closer, the ruler placed his hand on the edge of the balcony, putting his proud figure on display. The ruler of the kingdom of Archimaira, he smiled, realizing that his kingdom truly deserves such greatness. He says that this picture is truly impressive. Taking his time, the boy says that after so many hardships, Archimaira has become the strongest kingdom in the world. He concludes that it is time to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of the kingdom. Player Tsukasa Misaki is very emotional when he says that the game really does have all the monsters. He adds that the results of his efforts are really noticeable. The guy thinks it's amazing. He wonders what that orc was thinking. The guy explains that it was possible to get it during a national holiday, so he waited for it to be strong enough to put him in charge of the squad, and the orc was destroyed. The young man turned sharply, his cloak fluttering behind him, and firmly said that there was not long to wait. The guest was already on his way. Slowly, with a theatrical pause, he began counting down, and each number he said sounded like a bell striking the last moments before the storm. He had hardly finished when there was a discreet, respectful knock at the door. The king, without changing his expression, nodded, allowing entry, and the door swung silently open, letting in the one who would decide the outcome of this meeting. An elegant girl with fluffy ears entered the room and informed her master that preparations for the celebration of the founding of the city were complete, and asked the guy to go on stage. Tsukasa replies that he is ready to go on stage with the girl. She said one word, "Let's go." These are keywords, a system that allows players to interact and communicate in the game with NPS. The girl replied that she was listening and invited him to go ahead. She moves aside to let the master pass. Tsukasa thanks Reeve. He looks at her expression mysteriously. The girl looks forward without emotion, with an empty gaze, like a soldier on duty, and in an instant, her face takes on a very tired expression. Tsukasa smiles tenderly as he watches this. He recalls that Riv was one of 3 monsters that dropped from Gacha when he first started playing. The second was a low-ranking demon cat, and the third was a fairy. And now they are the commanders of the 2nd and 3rd Corps of the kingdom. Thanks to them and other monsters summoned by him, the kingdom has become the strongest, the 8 great army corps of the Archimaira kingdom. Tsukasa has been patiently taking care of her for these past few years, and she has grown into a first-class monster. And in the game, it's already the 150th anniversary of the founding of the kingdom. The guy thought that he was becoming too sentimental. He wonders what to say this year. The guy understands that no matter what he says, the game effect will not change. No one is forcing him to play a role. Something caught his attention. He looked up at the ceiling in fear because of a strange sound. The ceiling seemed to disappear. The picture in the game began to disappear and become overgrown with stripes of emptiness. The floor beneath his feet disappeared in a second. The heroes began to cry. Tsukasa screams loudly, not understanding what is happening. Reeve tries to catch him. The entire kingdom was covered in these glitches, huge stripes of emptiness, as if the game had begun to destroy itself and slowly disappear, leaving behind only a dark void. Suddenly, everything returned to normal. The heroes found the floor under their feet again. Tsukasa raises his head, wondering what just happened. Was it a bug? He understands that this is definitely not a new event. Reeve comes closer and asks if her master is hurt, to which the guy waved it off, saying that he is fine, and opened the game menu. Tsukasa tries to open the game menu and realizes that nothing is loading. He asks himself, why now? The guy understands that the NPS immediately reacted to what happened, which means it's definitely not a bug. Tsukasa lowered his head, wondering if it was a natural disaster. Judging from the situation, it looked like an earthquake. He understands that depending on the epicenter, the destruction could be massive, recovery would take a long time, and the citizens' happiness would drop. Tsukasa concludes that it is a disgusting event. Suddenly, something caught his attention. He looked somewhere in surprise, his eyes wide open. Tsukasa walked out onto the balcony of the palace, looking at the gray sky that rose above the kingdom. Dark clouds that did not promise anything good were floating dangerously above Archimaira's kingdom. The guy opened his eyes wide, asking what had happened, because the area around the capital had changed a lot. Before there was only steppe everywhere, and now there were huge trees around the city, which dangerously surrounded it. Tsukasa looked around the city, realizing that everything was intact, and he couldn't see any craters. The boy understands that it was not a natural disaster, not an earthquake, not a meteorite falling. Tsukasa wondered if it was a collective spell, but at the same time, he understands that the third and fourth buildings are currently in the capital. Abruptly, he gives the command to Reeve to return to headquarters. The girl agrees. The pair runs to the room where the magic ball is located. Running there, Tsukasa gives the order to contact the nearest teams. There is only interference in the ball, indicating that it will definitely not be able to contact anyone right now. The guy clenches his jaw and, realizing that he won't be able to communicate, orders the ball to open a map of the area. A huge, three-dimensional map of the entire kingdom appeared before him. Tsukasa screams in surprise. Is there really nothing like that around? He doesn't understand how this is possible. After all, the entire territory of the capital is covered in the fog of war. The guy makes the assumption that they could have been forcibly moved, they could have ended up in completely undeveloped lands. Forced transfer is one of the rarest and worst events, but Tsukasa first heard about the entire capital being forced to transfer and wonders if that's even possible. He closes his eyes, thinking that this can't be because only the administration could do this. The guy thinks that this is certainly not a fair act. The developers have a rather bad reputation, so he cannot say with certainty that they are really capable of such a thing. Reeve pointed at something with a frightened look and called for the master to look at it. The guy turned around and noticed that the girl was under the effect of fear. He understands that one of Reeve's special skills is courage, but now she's shaking and hurting. It seems like the event won't be the easiest. Tsukasa raises his hand and loudly tells the girls that their capital was most likely forcibly moved, and adds that now is the time to find out the current state of the kingdom. The guy concluded that he would pass on basic instructions to all corps. He orders Reeve to contact the commander of each corps and gather information to understand the current situation. The girl put her hand to her heart and loudly replied that she would do everything. The girl quickly left the room, leaving her master alone with his thoughts. In his head, the guy tries to open the command screen and tactical overview. Now, he wants to give separate instructions to each corps. Tsukasa began to tell all the leaders to pay attention to him and listen to his orders. To stop the festival due to an emergency, he demands that everyone follow his instructions. He tells the first corps that they will help him. The second corps will have to deal with maintaining the safety of the population. The third corps will provide aid to the wounded and should also check the barrier along the outer wall. The fourth corps uses reconnaissance magic to explore the area around the city. The fifth corps will provide all possible support to the second and provide assistance in damaged houses. The Sixth Corps collects information inside and outside the walls, in cooperation with the Fourth Corps. The Seventh Building carries out repair work on damaged objects. The Eighth Building will be responsible for control and protection of the capital. Tsukasa adds that none of the Corps should engage in combat with other kingdoms. He demands that they first find out what is currently happening in the kingdom and gather their corps. Tsukasa did his best. Now he will wait until he receives the report, she wonders. Who would have thought that all this would happen on the festival to celebrate the founding of the kingdom? The guy's face looks tired. He says that he hates this event and will file a complaint. He adds that there are always players who will be unhappy with a new update. Tsukasa thinks that if the holiday is ruined anyway, then it's worth going to meet the neighbors. He looks at the honey of other players and is very surprised because there is no one online now except himself. Someone knocked loudly on the door. Tsukasa was frightened by the surprise, but gave permission to enter. The door opened quietly. It was Reeve. She walked in, looking at the floor, and said that she had come to report the results. The guy was confused by her tone of voice and asked if there were any problems, to which the girl sheepishly replied that they had never encountered anything like this, and they were all a little confused. Reeve decided to get straight to the point. Her face took on a very serious look. He said that the kingdom was now surrounded by a dense forest. She added that according to the Sixth Corps, this forest has magical abilities and does not allow for further magical reconnaissance directly from the capital. Tsukasa thought about it and said that since he wouldn't allow it, then he should send the Fourth Corps for reconnaissance. Reeve said that the Fourth Corps team had already left in person. The guy was very surprised that someone started to act so quickly. The boy punched his palm, and considering that there was now a dense forest around them, he ordered Riv to organize a group of elves for reconnaissance. The girl looked up and said that she would do everything. Tsukasa turned around, wondering if this would be enough, and the girl sheepishly said that she would pass on all the instructions to the commander of the Fourth Corps. The guy's attention was distracted by something. He turned his surprised gaze to the side. It was Riv who took her notes, reporting that the group of the 8th Detachment were studying the air. She added that, according to the results of reconnaissance, the forest ends only in the northeast. This information surprised the guy too much. She clarified that due to the fact that the reconnaissance took place within the capital's borders, it is not possible to confirm this. The guy opened his eyes wide, looking at the girl. He did not understand what was happening to her. He asked himself a lot of questions as the girl continued. She said that the dragons asked to be allowed to rise higher or even fly beyond the borders of the capital, but she put him in his place, hitting him hard. The girl remembered how she scolded the dragon, who wanted to obey the order not to engage in battle with anyone, and loudly asked, "Is there anything incomprehensible here?" Riv passed by and said that they were still managing to keep the entire population calm. She began to think that the ogres who had recently joined. Tsukasa abruptly stopped the girl, asking her to be silent. The girl stopped and turned to her master. Maybe something had happened. He pointed his finger at her and asked her in panic if he had used key words, because the girl herself had started reporting the whole situation without the king's request, without key words. The girl looked at him strangely and asked what key words were. The guy was extremely shocked by this. He backed away, shouting loudly. Did she really answer him without a command? Reeve noticed his strange behavior and answered positively, then apologized and asked if that was an order. Tsukasa was still in shock and tried to accept the situation, realizing that this was all wrong. He sat down, saying that all this was impossible, because NPS should not react to phrases without keywords. Reeve assumed that the guy was just thinking and apologized for interrupting his thoughts. The guy was still sitting in complete shock because the girl responded to any of his phrases without key words. Tsukasa turned around abruptly and said that he would contact the admin. Riv did not write what was going on. The guy opened the menu and realized that he couldn't get in touch because there was no other response. The guy started to panic. He tried to calm himself down while Reeve looked at him with sympathy. She came closer, asking her master if he was okay. She noticed that he had suddenly turned pale and asked if he was ill. Abruptly, she brought her face closer and asked for forgiveness. She was too close. Tsukasa was very embarrassed by the closeness to the girl. He couldn't move and just looked into her eyes. Tsukasa touched her face, realizing that he could feel her as if she were a living person. Reeve didn't understand what she was doing or why they were looking at her so strangely, and she asked about it directly. The boy from school looked at her face, and in his head he thought that all this was impossible. All this was definitely impossible. He understands that the projection system of all senses is capable of transmitting all 5 senses, for example, the sensation of touching the skin. But it is all artificial sensation. But why is her skin so red? And the sweet scent of a young girl emanates from her. Tsukasa tries to figure out what the explanation is for all this. Only 3 things come to mind, the most logical being a very large update to the game. The update could have increased artificial intelligence, and all 5 senses are felt in such a way that it is impossible to distinguish from reality. Reeve is trying to understand what is happening to her master. She's very worried about him. The guy continues to think, the second option, this is all a very high-quality prank, and in front of him now is a very high-quality cosplay of Riva. In other words, this is a super large-scale prank from the administration. Tsukasa realizes that he has a third option left. This theme was very popular in novels about 5 years ago, where the main character ends up in the world of a manga or game. His thoughts stop at getting into another world. Tsukasa's expression is one of complete shock and confusion as to what is happening. Reeve starts shouting loudly that he will now call the commander of the 3rd squad for help. Tsukasa says that there is no need to worry about him. The girl, on the contrary, shouts that she will call for help. The guy again says that this is a waste of time and shows the girl to continue to monitor the situation. Reeve couldn't resist. She said she would do it and asked her master not to strain himself any further. Tsukasa, left alone, breathes quickly. Now he is overcome by severe panic. He is trying to restore his breathing. The guy wants to try to exit the game and presses the emergency exit button. An icon appeared, access denied, and the guy realized that he definitely wouldn't be able to exit the game. He turns his gaze to the huge windows nearby, looking sadly into them, not understanding what he should do now. Tsukasa remembers the excitement when he first entered the game. He still remembers it. Then he shouted the words, "Here begins their adventure." Now for him, these words took on a whole new meaning. His name is Tsukasa Misaki, and he is also Gelian, the ruler of the Archimaira kingdom. And in this new world, he will create an invincible army, because being an ordinary man, he became the weakest king. Tactics Chronicle is a new generation RPG in a fantasy world, so it has a lot of features that distinguish it from other games. In this game, the box itself is not capable of fighting. The player's physical abilities are the same as the average person in the real world, and it is impossible to become stronger. In short, in this game, the only strong ones are the subordinates themselves. The ruler himself is essentially a weak being in this world. Reeve reports that by order of the king, the commanders of the main corps, they arrived. In front of the king, on their knees, with their heads down, stood 8 magical creatures who commanded the main buildings of the capital. The guy asks them to raise their heads and thanks them for coming to him. He sits proudly on his throne. Tsukasa says that he hasn't seen some of them in a long time, but he's not going to waste time and says that they'll get straight to the point. The boy suddenly wonders if it is normal that he speaks to them in a commanding tone, but he also understands that he must appear before them as a proud king and a good ruler. He addresses the lion figure, telling it to report on the current situation in the country following the incident. He lightly squeezed his sword and prepared to report. This is the commander of the 2nd detachment, Baran. He reported that there are no security problems inside the kingdom. He added that as a result of the incident, several people were injured, and citizens are gradually calming down. Tsukasa looked at him sternly. Baran, the commander of the Beast Knights, he has a unique skill called Knight Spirit. In addition, he has the skill of discipline. If anyone can be trusted to maintain internal security, it is only him. Tsukasa praised him and thanked him for the work he had done and ordered Eltina to continue. The girl said that as her master commands. Eltira, an ancient elf, commander of the 3rd Corps, the girl began that, firstly, the 3rd Corps provided assistance to all the wounded. And she continued that, secondly, when examining the outer barrier, they noticed something. The road that ran from the main gate had disappeared. In addition, everything behind the wall was covered with dense forest. Tsukasa realizes that not only Riva, but other characters have also gained awareness. Eltina, the head of the Holy Spirit Order, specializes in healing and support. Her unique skill is mercy and teamwork. The elf added that, in addition, the forest is magical and does not allow reconnaissance using magic. The girl shared that at least she was not capable of it. Tsukasa nodded, realizing that most likely no one knew about their new location. He says that then the main task is to explore the world around them as quickly as possible, without revealing the existence of the kingdom. He orders to continue reconnaissance and try not to reveal themselves. Everyone loudly answered yes. The ruler thought that he had ordered to act carefully, and fortunately for him, no one objected. He supposes that no one will know that this is a cowardly step. Tsukasa turns to Riva sharply, asking if their elite mages from the 4th Corps can't handle forest magic. The girl replied that the report from the commander of the 4th Corps said that this was some kind of magic previously unknown to them, so it would take time. Piva is the commander of the 1st Squad, the commander of the guard squad closest to Tsukasa. Her main task is to directly assist the king. Her unique skill is bravery. In addition, she is in charge of all 8 corps. The guy understands that she said to use brute force. She said that they should wipe this world off the face of the earth with the magic of all members of the 4th Corps. Tsukasa stood up abruptly and said that he forbade them to do such a thing because they could disturb forces completely unknown to them. He added that, of course, it is possible that their existence is already known, but they should not rush because they have no right to even the slightest mistake. Reeve frowned and loudly replied that she knew he would say that, and that was why she answered the girl so that she would know her place, because her master forbade the use of brute force. The guy understands that everything is great now. Reeve lowers her head, thinking about something. There were probably a lot of doubts in her head about this whole situation. Tsukasa understands that she is holding up as always, but her tale gives away her excitement. But from it, you can immediately understand all the girl's thoughts. Sharply, the guy praised the girls in front of everyone. She loudly thanks her master. Tsukasa looked down, his expression conveying a lack of understanding of the situation, fear, and, as if illness, he himself tried to hold on, although his nerves were already at their limit. He doesn't just talk to his subordinates like that. He put his hand to his head, trying to think about something. There was one more thing in this game, the rebellion system. The guy's face looked very serious and tense. He definitely didn't need rebellions now, it would be too dangerous. After what happened, the happiness level is still low, which will lead to a drop in loyalty, and if that happens, a rebellion may break out. There are very strong monsters around him, and he is such a fragile, weak person. Even though he was a ruler, he still remained the most ordinary person, even though the higher races bowed their knees before him. He understands that now it is time to leave these thoughts, and says that if they want to conduct reconnaissance without the risk of provoking other countries, they will have to do it on their own, without magic. He points to a girl in dark clothes and tells the 6th Squad to deal with this issue. The girl shuddered, slightly frightened by the abrupt address to her person. The girl put her hand to her chest and said that since the master orders, the 6th Detachment will do everything in their power. The commander of the 6th Corps, Camilla, the Empress of Nightmares, added that there were some problems with reconnaissance of the forest. Tsukasa gritted her teeth and asked, "What's the problem?" The 6th Corps, led by Camilla, was created during the Cold War with other kingdoms, and they have no equal in the field of intelligence gathering. The girl looked down in embarrassment and said that she didn't think she could cope with forest exploration. Camilla added that everyone in her squad, including herself, had never worked in previously unexplored territory, so she was afraid that they wouldn't be able to handle it. Tsukasa's eyes widened, realizing he was wrong. It's true, they are specialists in collecting information for information warfare, land reconnaissance. That's something completely different. They specialize in gathering information in the enemy's country. Reconnaissance of unexplored territories is not their specialty. Camilla said that if there were no more suitable people, then the 6th Corps would take over, but the ruler quickly interrupted her and said that he understood her concerns. He smiled and said that he didn't mind the comments at all and thanked Camilla for her honesty. Camilla raised her head smoothly, her graceful chin lifting in a respectful gesture. Her long eyelashes lifted to reveal a look of silent gratitude before she bowed again. The boy felt a familiar tension tighten in his chest. He mentally reviewed all his etiquette lessons, forcing himself to breathe more evenly. He reminded himself roughly that he needed to keep the face of a king. He decided to do it differently, turning to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd squads. The guy asked if they remembered how to conduct reconnaissance in a new place. All the commanders of the 3 corps answered in unison in the affirmative. Some voices sounded more stern, some more confident, and some more softly and affectionately. Tsukasa decides to send a small group of elite soldiers to make sure they survive in the unknown lands. Depending on the results, they will decide what to do next. The guy loudly commands that he will leave internal security to Baran, and that Riv and Eltina will have to handle Reconnaissance. The girls answered unanimously that they would take care of it. The guy thinks that so much time has passed, and they have all become much stronger. He has no doubt that they will cope. Raising morale before an important task is perhaps one of the important duties of the king. She added that the only difference from their first reconnaissance would be the absence of Baran. The girls were very surprised by such words. In one movement, they bowed their heads, their backs bent in respectful obeisances, their foreheads almost touching the ground. Silence reigned for a moment, broken only by the rustling of clothes and subdued breathing. This greatly surprised the master. Their reaction alarmed him. He was confused by the way they shuddered, as if from some fear of him. His eyebrows rose slightly. Tsukasa continues. The Sixth Corps will have to go and collect information inside the capital. He tells Riv and Eltine to get ready. He added that the flight from the northern gate of the capital is in 10 minutes. The girls obediently bowed their heads and agreed. Tsukasa tries to figure out if it was his imagination or if they really got more tense. Did he say something wrong? The guy stood up from the throne, turned around and said that this would be the end of the audience. He ordered the rest of the teams to continue to carry out their duties. Everyone responded in unison positively. All the corps commanders were overextended. Tsukasa looked at them sternly, trying to understand what was going on. Their reactions to his words confused him too much. Fear slightly took over his body. He doubted his abilities as a ruler, and their reaction was finishing him off. There is nothing to be done because what he said can no longer be taken back. He has no choice but to resign himself for now, even if he is afraid. Now he wants to keep up appearances in front of the people in front of him. The ruler left the hall. All the commanders sat motionless in their places. They could not allow themselves to stand up until their ruler left the room. It would be an insult to him. There was complete silence in the hall. Even Tsukasa's steps died down. There was complete silence, but the people continued to sit in place, not moving and as if not breathing. Camilla took a sharp breath and relaxed her shoulders. She relaxed and leaned down slightly. She relaxed completely after the master left the room. The girl put her hand to her cheek and said that she was still not satisfied. She tells how she dreams of talking to the gentleman under different circumstances. Baran said that she was behaving very inappropriately. Camilla shouted that he simply had not been in her place and would not be able to understand her emotions and feelings. Putting her hand to her chest, the girl shared that everyone here was lucky because they had an advantage, and she had not had an audience with the gentleman for 3 years. The ram replies that the girl should resign herself to it because their dirty habits and ways will not give her a chance. He continued, saying that not everyone is worthy of being the king's confidants in the capital, but they, the 3 who had been there from the very beginning, were more worthy of it than anyone else. Camilla smiled slyly and replied that he shouldn't lie to himself. She explains that the king is a man, and that is why he does not notice. She gave Reeve's hobby as an example. According to her, her tongue does not turn to call this hobby worthy. Riv frowned. She was very uncomfortable with these words. And Camilla continued, saying that Eltina was also somehow suspicious. The elf showed her face with a smile and asked what the girl wanted to say. She clearly didn't like such words, even though she smiled as if there was no kinder creature, but she was probably hiding something behind the smile. Camilla was very scared by the unexpected appearance of her friend, and Eltina asked whether she would explain or not. She was ready to catch the mistress of the night on any unnecessary word. Camilla looked away abruptly, as if she was very scared. She began to act stupid, saying that she didn't mean to say anything like that. Her gaze fell to the floor from embarrassment and shame. The elf offered her friend to sit down next to her, inviting her with a gesture and a phrase. She smiled kindly, but this smile definitely did not give anything good. Sitting with her back straight as a string, she waited for the girl to sit down next to her. Camilla tensed, asking if she was sure she should sit next to him. She tried to find the words to politely refuse, but she couldn't find the right ones. The words just stuck in her throat. Eltina called her friend to sit down with a wild smile on her face. It clearly did not bode well. Such a smile only made Camilla tense up even more. The girl sat down, and the elf suggested discussing why she called her strange. She folded her hands together in a kind and sweet gesture, but she was clearly waiting for the girl to slip up and screw up even more. Camilla, with trembling hands, replied that she simply wanted to say that the king liked girls. Eltina concluded that the girl had chosen too strange a way to say it. Eltina smiled slyly and asked if the girl was really hinting that the elf liked the lord. She said that in fact she liked cute girls. Camilla frowned and said that was exactly what she called strange. Eltina replied that there was nothing suspicious or bad about it. She added that she had once seen the Lord muttering this under his breath. Camilla was very surprised by such information. If the Lord were here, he would probably avoid the topic by awkwardly apologizing and changing the subject to some funny story. Eltina added that there is still something cute about a girl's face when she is about to cry, because in this world, the elf smiled and said that there was nothing sweeter than a girl who was about to burst into tears, nothing better. Camilla opens her mouth as if she wants to say something, but she can't. The whole situation looks very stupid. The girl's eyes are wide open, her mouth is closed, and her head is full of questions about what to say now. But she suddenly fell silent, turned her gaze to Baran. She hoped that he would help her. Her eyes were begging for help. She could not bear this dialogue. It was too difficult for her. Lev turned away from her, as if he was out of place here. The girl didn't like this at all. Baran turned to Riv. He noticed that she was silent too much and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl looked down. A shadow of doubt flashed in her eyes. It seemed she was about to say something very important. The words seemed to get stuck between her lips, but she found the strength to start some kind of thought. She shared that this whole strange story does not give her any peace at all. Reeve said that the way their master speaks, all the eagles in the hall turned their full attention to the girl, waiting to hear what she would say next. Eltina agreed and asked if the girl had noticed it too. Camilla added that she also noticed this and concluded that she definitely did not imagine it. The girl said that she would then keep an eye on the situation in the capital and asked if Reeve was against it. The girl raised her head sharply, and her eyes, cold as steel, pierced her interlocutor. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she uttered a short but firm agreement. Riv approached the elf and asked if she could listen to her. Eltina answered positively and asked what happened. The girl shared that this whole situation with the transfer of the capital had thrown her into shock. She was very worried about the gentleman, but she understood that no matter how difficult things might be, he would be able to cope because he was a great ruler. Reeve concluded that they would all be his pawns, as always. They must work together to pave the way for their kingdom and their king. Eltina smiled and said that she didn't think it was wrong to worry about the king. Reeve said that she had no one else to share with and apologized. The elf replied that she shouldn't worry about it because it was also part of her job. Tsukasa lay on the table with her head in her hands. He wonders what he did wrong. He scolds himself for intending to be a good king, but ended up making a mistake, and he feels like things are only going to get worse. Tsukasa calmed down and thought that there was nothing to be done, come what may. The main thing now was to see Riv and Eltina off. The guy tells himself that he has had enough of sitting around doing nothing. He should go there and observe everything with his own eyes, hear everything with his own ears. This is what his teacher taught him. In his opinion, this is necessary if he wants to be responsible for others. But the guy never expected to become a big shot at the age of 20. The guy looked at the open doors and was very surprised by this. Tsukasa stood and looked at the warriors who were gathering to go on reconnaissance. The number was simply enormous. It was impossible to count. The guy didn't understand what it was. He wondered, is this all for reconnaissance? He thinks that all this is too much. He slowly turned his gaze to the side. Reeve and Eltina stood next to him. The girls said they were ready, and the warriors would take care of their master's cloak. Abruptly, the guy's armor was removed. He was left in his light clothes, but quickly they began to put new armor on him, which shone brightly silver in the light of the bright sun above them. Tsukasa wondered what was going on. Riv proudly declared that no matter what happened, she would protect her master. Eltina replied that she was ready to go and added that she would do everything possible for their kingdom. The guy started denying everything. He didn't understand what was going on, why they were dressing him in expedition armor. Eltina was already behind him to throw the cloak over his shoulders. Tsukasa realizes that this all looks like he is going on a mission himself. Then he said that the only difference from their first expedition was that Baran would not be with them. The only difference Baran would not be, the guy began to understand that he, who had led the first expedition, would also go with them. He came to a realization. The Ram ordered everyone to raise their swords and listen. He proudly announced that the king himself was coming to conduct the expedition, and everyone should greet him properly. Tsukasa turns a stern look to Riv. He didn't immediately understand what he said and did wrong, but the realization slowly took over his consciousness. He slowly began to understand that he would go with the girls on a dangerous journey. She looks back at him, a smile plays on her lips, and her eyes burn with the strongest determination. She believes that their journey will be wonderful. The guy closed his eyes and said that he hadn't personally gone on an expedition for a long time, so he didn't even think about what he said. He already hated his stupidity, and especially his long tongue. Tsukasa went forward. The boy wonders, why is this happening? How does a kingdom send its king on a reconnaissance mission? He asks for someone to stop all this before it's too late. Tsukasa walked forward carefully, looking at the forest around him, his armor making a quiet noise with every step the boy took. Riv and Eltina walked next to him, making sure that there was nothing suspicious nearby and that nothing could harm their master. The elf was simply carefully examining the forest, and the second was already preparing her fists. The guy wonders what's wrong with this forest. They've been walking for an hour now, but the picture around them hasn't changed. He's looking at the forest sternly, looking for answers to his questions. He realizes that there are still the same trees around. It's all because of the magical effect. He wonders if they are losing their sense of distance. Suddenly, very strange sounds came from somewhere. He was surrounded from all sides. Tsukasa tensed up. The girls were preparing to protect the master, and the forest began to change its shape. The trees seemed to start twisting. The picture was not the best, but all three were preparing to attack from behind. Suddenly, the sky cleared up. It became much lighter. The eerie atmosphere seemed to have disappeared. The trees became more even. The picture was more pleasant to the eye. Somewhere in the distance, the singing of birds could be heard. Tsukasa was very surprised by such magic from the forest. Eltina explained that the effect of the illusion on the forest suddenly disappeared. She immediately felt the changes in the magic of the forest. Her nature could immediately feel such a thing. The guy thought there was a chance that they had simply gone out of the radius of the magic. He frowned at the forest. It was a mystery. It was completely unclear how this magic worked. He thought about it, and putting his foot on a snag, he asked himself if this point was the end of the creepy forest. He wanted to understand the scheme of how magic works. Riv turned around sharply, as if she had sensed something. She was looking at the entire forest. Her special feeling was haunting her. Her master could be attacked. She could not allow this, so she carefully looked at the forest. The girl shouted loudly that something was approaching them. Suddenly, something hit loudly and a huge wolf appeared in front of them. He was several years taller than everyone else on the team. He bared his huge teeth, saliva flowing down his jaw. He was ready to destroy everything in his path. Reeve's throat stood in front of her master, preparing to protect him. Tsukasa realized that it was a werewolf, more than 5 meters tall. He understood that the monster was probably hostile. He looked at it sternly. Thoughts about how to defeat it began to spin in his head. The guy wonders if this is really their first encounter with the local fauna. He wanted to be more friendly, but it seems that won't work. He'll have to defend himself. Riv attacked first to protect the man behind. He attacked the monster. He took a step back and howled loudly in pain. In an instant, he seemed to have decided to disappear, but again stood on his paws, but as if he was no longer going to attack. The girl says that the wolf most likely realized that he would lose, and therefore immediately retreated. She called him a weak bug, because he could have died in vain. Her voice sounded stern and arrogant. The guy understands that this is what he expected from the beastman, the moonwolf Riva. She was an amazing girl, strong and brave. She wasn't just Tsukasa's direct assistant. Her powers were enough to call him a simple bug. She was much stronger than it might seem at first glance. Reeve's first subordinate, naturally she would be stronger than some wandering werewolf. The girl proudly stood in front of her master, preparing to destroy anyone who stood in their way. Eltina seemed to notice something. She looked away slightly, trying to understand what exactly she heard. Eltina loudly announced that something was approaching to the northeast. She knitted her eyebrows, preparing to attack if that something was nearby. This information greatly surprised the guy. He became very wary after these words. He decided to open the tactical interface. He waved his hand and a small window appeared in front of him. Tsukasa opened the map because Eltina had warned him, and an exchange of information took place. 2 white dots appeared on the map, which means it is unknown whether they are enemies or friends. The guy loudly warns that there are 2 people there, and it looks like the first one is chasing the second one. Both dots were quickly moving forward. One was trying to escape from the second one. Eltina noticed that they were moving together and not towards the team. Her face expressed complete readiness for any outcome of events. She also added that she heard a faint scream from a person trying to escape. Tsukasa loudly gives the order for them to quickly start running. His voice sounded very loud, as if he was afraid of something and was rushing the girls to start running as quickly as possible. The girls agreed in unison and rushed forward. All three began to quickly run forward, away from the unknown danger. The landscapes quickly replaced each other. The already ordinary trees ran along with them. The team was in a great hurry. The girl, wrapped in a cloak, quickly ran forward, trying not to stop. She was very tired and breathing heavily, but something very dangerous was running after her. She could not allow herself to stop. A dark dog was running very quickly after her. It wanted to bite off a piece of the girl. The creature was oozing dark and dangerous energy. It was drooling on the girl who was running in front of it. Eltina called out sharply that she saw their target. Reeve asked if it was them. They stopped, ready to intercept the old dots on their map. Everyone was tense. Tsukasa ordered the elf to stop the demonic beast. The girl did not resist. She screamed and rushed forward to save the man in the cloak. After creating a magic circle, she cast a spell to summon a sharp blade of wind. She was completely serious and ready to attack at any moment. The blade pierced the dark dog from all sides. It flew away from the company, cutting off piece after piece from the dog. Almost no living place was left. The demonic beast broke into several pieces after being hit by a very sharp blade. The girl who was running away from it turned around sharply, looking at the dog. Tsukasa was very surprised that the girl completely cut this dog. He did not expect such enormous strength from an elf, and especially from such a kind girl as Eltina. Judging from the number of pieces, it was low-level magic, but with a very high firing speed, but a low casting speed. He looked at the dog sternly. The guy noticed that the animal was no longer moving, which meant it was no longer alive. He stood and looked at the remains of this wild dog. A quiet question was heard nearby. Was this really advanced wind magic? The team came closer to the girl in the cloak. She was sitting on the ground and pressed against a tree, not trusting the people in front of her at all. She put her hand to her chest, thinking how to defend herself in case of danger. She asked if they had managed without a catalyst. She looked down uncertainly. Tsukasa said that he was very glad that they made it in time, and wanted to ask if she was hurt. The girl grabbed the hood with her fingers and began to slowly remove it from herself. An elf appeared from under the cloak, with a very serious expression on her face, as if she was very unhappy with something. She looked straight into the guy's eyes. Her eyes were burning with mistrust. Tsukasa was very surprised that they found an elf. The girl put the hood back on, but then thought carefully and took it off completely again. She thanked the guys for saving her. Tsukasa wonders if she's still being cautious. He smiles kindly and says that there is no need to thank them, since they just happened to be passing by, but he is glad that they managed to save her. The girl tensed up at the words that they were just passing by, and asked if there was a beastman and an elf next to the guy. The girls introduced themselves. Riv looked sternly at the girl, not trusting her, and Eltina, on the contrary, smiled affectionately. The girl remained silent, but drew her eyebrows together even more. She could not trust strangers completely. Even though he was currently in a game where he could be anyone, the thought of having to interact socially made him feel a little tense, and he clearly didn't like the idea. As he weighed his options, he came to the logical conclusion that Eltina would be much better suited to the task. After all, her natural charm and ease of communication were undeniable. The girls came closer to the guy with a gentle smile on their faces. Eltina was closer to him. Her gentle smile radiated full-fledged warmth. Nothing could give any doubt that she was the best candidate for negotiations. She carefully approached her master from behind. The guy was very surprised by the stranger's presence behind his back. Still with the same sweet smile, and nothing foreshadowed trouble, she only inspired trust. The girl covered her eyes in embarrassment. It was obvious that the thought of the need for socializing made her feel distinctly uncomfortable. From her tone, it was clear that she had never been a talent for conversation. Reeve merely nodded sharply in confirmation, her arms crossed over her chest and her tense posture speaking louder than any words. Her entire being radiated a frank antipathy to idle talk. Tsukasa, of course, wanted to blame everything on Eltina, but he feels like someone has stabbed him in the back. He cursed and realized that he would have to cope on his own. The girl looked sternly at the group and asked if the girls were his slaves. All three looked strangely at the stranger. She asked again, was she right? And why were all three of them silent? Tsukasa shouted sharply that no, they were all traveling together. The girl looked down and asked why they saved the half-breed. The guy was very surprised and asked again. The elf began to throw on her hood with a sharp movement, but suddenly froze, her fingers convulsively clenching the fabric. Her lips pressed tightly together, as if trying to hold back words that had been accumulating for a long time. After an excruciatingly long pause, the girl took a deep breath and confessed her half-blood origin. Her voice trembled, and her gaze wandered over the faces of her companions, looking for the slightest sign of disappointment or disgust. Her entire posture expressed the expectation of inevitable condemnation. The guy turned sharply to her, his face reflecting genuine amazement. His wide-open eyes showed his incomprehension of the very possibility of such thoughts. The girl was very surprised, and Tsukasa asked why he should regret that she was a half-breed. En took a step forward to the girl. He really didn't understand where she got such thoughts that he would regret it. The girl became embarrassed and was very surprised by such an unexpected question. Her eyes opened a little wider, her cheeks turned red, and the girl herself took a small step back out of fear. The elf fidgeted nervously, her fingers twisting the edge of her cloak as she tried to explain the situation. She was convinced that she had been saved by mistake, simply because of her physical resemblance to a pure-blooded elf. Tsukasa tilted his head to the side, his eyebrows furrowing in mild confusion. He clearly didn't understand what the girl was getting at. Her half-blood origins didn't matter to him at all. His gaze was filled with genuine incomprehension. Suddenly, a powerful, sonorous voice rang out from behind them, instantly drawing everyone's attention to itself. The stranger's intonation clearly conveyed surprise. Bordering on mockery, he could not believe someone's ignorance. Behind them, a tall elven man stood, imposing and unperturbed. His mannerisms betrayed him as an elf. According to him, before them was only a pitiful half-breed, a representative of the same corrupted race that everyone knew about. His tone became even more sarcastic. The elf's eyes slid curiously over the group. He was clearly seeing these people for the first time, and the strength with which they dealt with his guardian apparently impressed him. Tsukasa realized that these were his dogs, and asked the elf directly about it. But the man asked if it was really a human in front of him. He explained that he was surprised that the man was so close to the endless forest. He hadn't seen them here for a long time. He noticed how the guy shuddered at the name of the forest. The guy was very surprised by the name of the forest. He decided to leave it for later. She stood in front of the girl, blocking her with her body. He wanted to protect her from this madman, and singled out another. He asked sternly about the corrupted race. The girl behind him, with a seal in her eyes, lowered her gaze. It was clear from her that this topic was very much connected with pain and sadness somewhere far in the past. The man was surprised that he actually didn't know. With his whole appearance, he made it clear that not knowing the story was simply shameful, because everyone had known it for a long time. Everyone knew why half-breeds were disgusting. He explained that the girl was a half-breed, not like normal elves, noble elves, loved by gods and spirits. He spoke in a very arrogant tone, showing his dislike for the girl behind him. Proudly raising his finger to the sky, he continued, saying that the girl was the fruit of a dirty love between an elf and an impure human who could only deteriorate like cockroaches, so she considered the girl to be from a corrupted race. The little elf tried to defend herself, saying that she was not from a dirty race at all. She did not want to listen to such insults towards her. She did nothing to be called dirty. The man grimaced sharply and ordered her to shut up, because just hearing her voice, it was as if someone had shit in his ears. He told the dirty half-breed not to dare open her mouth. The girl shut up and hid behind Tsukasa. For him, at first glance, a beautiful elf, but this expression of disgust on his face, not much different from a human, also ugly, but now is not the time to think about it. There was no human race in this game. It was exclusively the ruler race. This was one of the features of the game that attracted attention. Although there are many humanoid races, such as elves and dwarves, there were no humans in the game, other than the player. His words already go against the setting of the game. He understands that there is no point in thinking about it now. The main thing now is to gather information. The guy loudly asked why the elf was chasing her. He wanted to understand the whole situation to the end. The man replied that he was just having fun. He turned his arrogant gaze on the guy and smiled slyly. For him, all this was nothing more than a very funny game. He began to tell that in that city there were so many of these parasites, and compared them to rats. His hounds appeared next to him, who were already ready to attack. The man smiled and said that he was using the girl to train his hounds, and next to him appeared his first dogs, who were ready to protect their master. Tsukasa drew his eyebrows together, emphasizing the words about the city. Thoughts were gathering in his head piece by piece. He almost came up with a plan to save the girl. He saw all the elf's dirt. He was disgusted by it. The elf continued, saying that half-breeds have the audacity to call their place of residence a country. He asks the guy to imagine that they founded an entire city. The elf smiles sarcastically and says that as a pure-blooded elf he can get the most out of the city. He didn't care about the lives of the elves. He didn't think about anything at all. His soul is blacker than any darkness. And of course, he wants to get rid of all this dirt. He asks if the ignorant man now understands the whole situation. In his hand, a ball of magical energy was gathering. He is ready to attack. Tsukasa thinks that he talks too much for someone who is in the minority. Is he really that confident in his abilities? The guy clenches his jaw. Tsukasa apologized and said that they were just travelers and had never been to that part of the country, adding that they didn't want to appear ignorant. The elf smiled sarcastically and asked if he really admitted his ignorance. This angered the guy, and he furrowed his brows even more. He was disgusted by every word the elf said. The man says he thought all monkeys were the same, but with a sly smile he clarifies. So the guy is an unusual monkey? A magic sphere lit up in his hands. But he was afraid that it was too late to beg for forgiveness. The light in his hands became brighter. The wind around him thickened, fluttering Tsukasa's cloak. The situation was really dangerous. They could be seriously injured. The elf's expression again took on a creepy look. With anger on his face, through a smile he said that, for the fact that the guy distracted him from hunting, he would have to pay with his life. The girl runs forward. She screams loudly for the elf to stop calling him a monkey, because he is a very ordinary person. Her voice almost broke from screaming. She was so angry that her jaws were clenching. The girl asks that her people be left alone, because they live quietly and do not bother anyone. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. She was so offended by the whole situation that all she could do was cry and scream. She added that not far from the endless forest and desert, her voice became louder. Fear faded into the background. She wanted to achieve justice for the half-breeds. The girl bowed slightly and, with tears in her eyes, began to explain that they were already trying their best to survive, but still, people like the elf. The man interrupted her, his face twisted in anger. He shouted loudly for the half-breed to shut her mouth, reminding her how disgusted he was by her voice. His face twisted so much that it looked disgusting. For a second, he calmed down and added that he himself would silence her forever, directing a storm arrow at the team. The guys were ready to be sent and erased the elf's magic dogs. Tsukasa, without thinking, stood in front of the little elf in an attempt to protect her. The airflow was terribly strong. The guy could hardly stand on his feet, trying to protect the girl behind him. He wonders what he's doing. Did he want to die? His eyes expressed panic and fear. He didn't think at all before standing in front of the girl. He regrets his actions because now he's risking his life. The guy felt that this flow of wind was too strong, and from the roaring sound of the wind his eardrums would soon burst. The guy was holding on to his feet with all his might, but he tried because Rafa's life depended on him. He didn't understand why he did it, because now he could lose. He covered his face with his hands, saving his face from a very strong flow of wind. He was already preparing for his rightful end. Suddenly, a windshield appeared in front of him and the girl. Magic circles created a dome around the couple, which protected them from such a powerful attack. Both raised their heads, not understanding what was happening. Eltina stood in front of them, protectively. She raised her hand to conjure an entangling vine. A magic circle appeared around her hand, with which the girl cast a spell. A plant with very sharp thorns enveloped him and drove him into the air. He ordered his skeins to deal with the team. But Riv dealt with them very quickly, cutting them into small pieces. All this time, Riv and Eltina understood perfectly well the importance of the first contact, so they had to endure when the arrogant elf insulted their master, because collecting information was much more important. Eltina hid her dislike and disgust with a smile, and Riv tried her best to suppress the desire to leave no trace of him or of any other reckless actions, but since he attacked first, that was a completely different story. Riv moved forward to try to destroy the elf. She was angry at him and only glad of the chance to attack him. The elf screamed loudly for Riv to stop and not attack him. She closed her eyes, waiting for her strong blow that would smash his wonderful face into small pieces. The girl stopped a meter away from him, freezing in place. She did not attack, as if something did not allow her to do so. Something held and stopped her, did not allow her to move her hand and attack. Tsukasa ordered the girl to stop and not attack. His voice sounded very stern. He can't allow them to hurt an elf from another kingdom, because it could become a strong pretext for starting a war. The elf asked a bunch of questions per second. What kind of vine was this? When did it appear? But suddenly he was called out. He understood that he had not been hit, although there was less than a meter left for that. Tsukasa shouted loudly so that the elf could hear him. She said that she was not going to destroy him. There was no need to shed blood. He explained that the elf simply forced them. He continued, saying that this was all to cool the elf's ardor and asking if he understood it. His voice sounded even more stern than usual. He was preparing for any answer the elf would give. The man grimaced, not understanding anything. He was so angry that he clenched his teeth and wanted to respond sharply, but he did not want to be hurt, after all. He wanted to stay alive. Tsukasa repeated that they would spare him, but he would spare him, but he would have to disappear. The elf began to loudly complain about how some human could order him what to do and generally open his mouth towards a noble elf. The man continued to say that he was much better than a human, and instead of shouting that he was a grateful leader of the elves, Tsukasa threateningly put his hand forward. With a serious face, he said that he didn't care who the elf was. He said that he had to disappear, or the guy would show all his strength. His face spoke of the seriousness of his intentions. The vine began to slowly let the elf down to the ground. She carefully put the elf down on the ground. He was really angry. He was opposite the team, looking at them angrily. He already hated them. The man's face took on a very unkind expression. He definitely didn't like these circumstances. He was completely released. The team stood and looked at him, waiting for him to leave and not appear before their eyes again. It was dangerous. Tsukasa could destroy a representative of another country. It could end very badly for the team. The destruction of one of the representatives of another country could become a pretext for war. You can't start a war without knowing anything about the enemy. It was really dangerous. Such tactics were not the best of all the options they had. They were lucky that the elf surrendered easily. The little elf carefully approached from behind. She wanted to say something. With uncertain steps, she approached the guy from behind. The words were almost on her lips, but she was a little unsure. She sheepishly thanked the guy for saving her. She was very grateful. Her eyes were tired. She had survived the chase from the dog, and then such a sudden appearance of the elf, she was very tired. Tsukasa turned around and said that it was no problem for him at all, and he was glad that she was safe. He was slightly surprised by such unexpected gratitude from the girl. He was just glad to help her. The guy cursed, realizing that he had shown the girl that he was Reeve and Eltina's boss. He wanted to hide this information as much as possible. He wanted to hide his true status as a king. This ruins his image of a normal traveler. Tsukasa tried to justify himself by saying that the girls were actually his very loyal companions. His voice sounded unsure. He was making it up as he went along. He added that without them he was simply pathetic. Without them he was like without arms. So he constantly asked for help. The guy laughed awkwardly. He was embarrassed by his own words. He really doubted his abilities. The girl was surprised, and then she herself laughed sweetly at the whole situation in front of her. Her face was painted with a sweet and bright smile. She laughed sincerely after saving her life in such a way. Tsukasa was very surprised. He didn't understand what could make the girl laugh so much. But she continued to giggle. She really found it funny after the guy's words about his uselessness. The guy still didn't understand. The elf apologized and explained that such a strong elf could be defeated by a very ordinary person, and she found it funny that she, a half-elf, had problems with this. The girl put her hand to her chest and apologized for her sudden laughter. She explained that the guy shouldn't humiliate himself like that in front of her. She smiled brightly. She was safe now. Tsukasa was very surprised by this, and he composed this sentence without answering. He just looked straight ahead with complete incomprehension on his face. It stretched out comically, and his eyes opened comically in surprise. The elf introduced herself. Her name is Reifa. She thanked the guy again for his help. He replied that it was not difficult for him. He took a small step towards the girl to talk to her. Tsukasa explained that they were just trying to calm him down, and there was nothing to thank him for. Reifa bowed slightly and said that they still saved her and asked to accept her gratitude. Her bow looked elegant, as if the girl had aristocratic manners, as if she was an important person. The girl closed her eyes and said that she felt very uncomfortable, but she wanted to ask for something. She was really interested in something. Tsukasa perked up and asked what was wrong. His face expressed surprise and a couple more questions. He didn't quite understand how else he could help the girl. Reifa smiled and asked the guy to introduce himself. Her elegant manners were preserved in every movement. Her eyes were shining, unlike the first minutes of the meeting. The guy was surprised at first, but then he smiled tenderly. He gave the girl the most tender and kind smile. Her words warmed his soul and enveloped him in pleasant warmth. He came a few steps closer to the girl. Eltina and Riv stood nearby, waiting. At any moment their master could give an order. The elf stood with a gentle smile, and the beast girl stood sternly. Tsukasa smiled, extended his hand, and introduced himself with his character name, Gelian, his smile looking genuine and pure, as if it could light up and warm the whole world. The elf smiled wider and said that it was nice to meet her, and introduced herself again. With an elegant movement, she prepared to extend her hand for a firm handshake. They shook hands with each other. It was a warm and strong handshake. Warm and business-like relations began to appear between them. Acquaintances with another kingdom only played into the guy's hands. Walking through the forest, the boy asked who the elf was. The girl replied that the city was attacked by elves from Noblewood. Rafa explained that the name was from the kingdom, Lastwood. The girl became embarrassed and said that kingdom was too big a word, estate would be more appropriate here. She doubted and dined that it would be better to call it a community. She explained that 30 years ago, their pride was founded by an ordinary half-elf. Tsukasa thought that 30 years was not that long. The girl agreed, and added that the half-elf race had not started that long ago. She continued, explaining that the number of half-elves had increased dramatically 100 years ago, before which they could be called a rarity. 100 years ago, a war with people began. The elves won the first battle thanks to their magical skills, but the humans were much more numerous, and they were overwhelming in numbers, so the elves began to suffer defeat after defeat. People began to cruelly exterminate the elves, and they were forced to retreat into the great forest. There they founded their own state, and 5 years after the start of the war, a peace treaty was signed. But there is one thing, what happened to the elves who were captured by humans? All three of them seriously tensed up after this question. The elves are very beautiful, so they began to serve humans, aristocrats, and high-ranking military personnel. They were treated very badly. Rafa continued that after the peace treaty, most of the elves were returned to their homeland, but many of them were already pregnant, and therefore bore offspring from humans. The girl looked down and said that although she calls them her ancestors, she is only from the 4th generation of half-breeds. Tsukasa's jaw dropped, straining even more at the girl's words. She continued, the elves did not want to recognize the half-elves. She considered this logical, because they hated people, they, half-breeds, became the object of disgust and mockery. And now, the elves hate them more than people. Tsukasa interrupted her and asked, what do people think about them? Rafa replied that they don't like them either, but they treat them better than the elves. She continues by saying that there is not a single elf who treats them well, but some humans who come into their forest are very friendly to them. The girl concluded that one of them even helped her. There are good people in the world. The guy was surprised after such a story. Tsukasa frowned, realizing that there was no such plot in the game, although elves really exist, but there was no war 100 years ago. The guy clarifies that ordinary elves do not like half-breeds, to which he received a positive answer. Rafa added that they just want to live in peace. Their city is very close to human territory, so the elves want to use them as a human shield in case of war with humans. But because they are close to the magical forest, no one has touched them yet. Her voice became more serious as she shared that 3 weeks ago, Noblewood's army suddenly began to attack. Tsukasa asked the girl why the elves attacked the half-bloods. Rafa shared that she herself did not know the reason. She said that the elves came and began to say that they were of noble blood and came by right to rule this land. The girl frowned and said that she would never accept this. Tsukasa made the assumption that they could take over their lands to be closer to the humans. Then they would have a chance in the war against the humans. Rafa replied that she didn't know and that it was all too complicated for her. The girl makes the assumption that the elves want to become a great power, as they were 100 years ago, and they wanted to use the city as a strategic base. The girl lowered her head. Her voice became quieter. She said if they just wanted to occupy the city, then why would they chase after them? Her voice became sad. She really didn't understand this. The guy was confused by the fact that they attacked without declaring war. He had some idea and asked the girl who was ruling the city now. He was really interested. Rafa replied that their city was a matriarchy and was ruled by a woman. The guy nodded. He was satisfied with the girl's answer. She said that the Queen of Lastwood and the Prince Consort were missing. Rafa continued. She said that they are not as strong in magic and powerful as the elves, so the girl hopes that the Queen is alive. She was the one who united them and founded the country. The guy was very tense about this opinion of history. He thought the city was plundered, the ruler was missing. He understood that this was a complete defeat. Tsukasa wonders if there is anything he can do in this situation. He concludes that the first thing he can do is retreat and then team up with someone and try to fight back together. But half-elves are discriminated against not only by elves but also by humans. That's why they got together and created an entire kingdom, because they simply had no one to turn to. Rafa asked sharply if the guys could wait a little. Tsukasa replied that everything was fine. The girl explained that there were 10 minutes left to their city, but the residents might get scared when they see it, and might get scared. They hadn't seen the most ordinary and kind people for too long. They might get scared. Therefore, the girl wanted to warn them so that there would be no confusion. The guy replied that it would be nice. He himself understood the whole situation with half-elves and people. Eltina, with a stern face, stepped forward in front of her master. As if she was afraid of something, she stood proudly in front, protecting her master. She explained it as a magic circle and said that it was better to be careful. Even if the girl was kind to them, it never hurt to be careful. In front of everyone on the ground, I drew a huge magic circle. It was shining and magic was oozing out of it. The circle turned out to be really huge. The magic of summoning promised to be amazing. Rafa stood and began to read something similar to a spell, she calls, asks to hear her friend, her comrade. Tsukasa sees that it looks like summoning magic, but he has never heard a spell cast like that. He doesn't know how elven magic is used here. The more information they can gather, the better. The girl continued to call. She asked to accept her as one of her own, asked to hear her ringing voice and come immediately. She used the call of an ally. A person will appear in the magic circle. The girl, dressed in armor and holding a weapon in her hands, appeared before everyone. She looked strong and stern. She would definitely not spare anyone if her acquaintances were in danger. Sharply, she loudly addressed her mistress. Is everything okay with her? She was very worried. It was visible on her face. In her voice, she gave out all the fear for her mistress, not to mention her facial expression. The girl held out her bow, mistaking Tsukasa's team for the elves. She prepared to attack. In her hands was the confidence to destroy all the people in front of her. Rafa ordered Venri to stop. She said that it was the travelers who saved her. She frowned and her voice became very stern. She was very unhappy with the girl's behavior. The girl did not humiliate herself. She said that there was an elf and a beastman here. Rafa shouted loudly that it was an order. Her voice became even stricter. She was already starting to get angry. The elf looked at her mistress and slowly lowered her bow, looking sternly at Tsukasa's command. The guy looked at this picture with the thought that Rafa had summoned an older half-breed and wondered, "Mistress?" He did not understand why such a formal address to the girl. Rafa apologized for Venri's behavior and added that they were all on edge lately and apologized again for her behavior. The guy replied that everything was fine. He wanted to ask the girl something. She was ready to answer and asked what was the matter. Tsukasa asked her to say her full name. He looked at the girl with some strange thoughts in his head, as if he was afraid to find out the answer. The girl smiled and said that she would be happy to answer. Her full name is Leifa Rim Lastwood. She added that a little more, and they would reach her kingdom. She smiled and said that there she would greet them as a member of the royal family. Her eyes were shining with sincerity and kindness. She wanted to trust them and show them her city of half-bloods. The half-elf looked around the village she lived in. Leifa pointed out that if they went a little further, they would reach a village. Gelian understood her. Looking around, he noticed archers who were not pleased with his appearance. The main character was tense under the half-elves' gazes. The boy wanted to know who the princess had brought in such a difficult time for their people, as if there weren't enough elves. Leifa told Venri that this company had saved her, but the archers still couldn't imagine what was going on in her head. Finally, Tsukasa and his companions reached the half-elf village. The people of Ladyswood greeted the girl joyfully, while the boy looked around tensely. The princess called the villagers together and announced that the people she had brought had saved her, and if they were rude to these people, it would be the same as an insult to her. The half-elves looked at the team with caution and interest. The townspeople were discussing the travelers with apprehension. Warriors, among whom was an elf and also a man with black hair, dark eyes, they had never seen anything like this. Gelian felt like he was in a zoo due to the close attention paid to his person. Leifa Reem Ladystwood. She is the queen's first daughter, in other words, the first princess and heir to the throne. It is unknown whether the current queen has chewed. It seems that Leif is able to unite the people under her leadership. She also has a younger sister. Except for her parents, whose fate is unknown, only 2 of the royal family remained. Why did she, such an important person, end up alone in the middle of the forest where they were chasing her? These thoughts did not give the main character any peace. The three travelers went to the throne room, where they decided to find out how the princess ended up in such a dangerous situation. As it turned out, Lifa went to save the current queen. She explained that the elves do not kill them, but take them captive, or try to take them alive. So there is a chance that her mother, the current queen, is still alive. Lifa took an elite squad of half-elves with her and rescued the ruler. Gelian wanted to find out all the circumstances, so he asked why the princess was in the forest all alone, and where the personal detachment that was supposed to protect her was. The soldiers were discovered by the enemy before they could get over the city wall. They could not be saved. Lifa barely escaped. The others were caught trying to give her an opportunity to retreat. The main character wanted to ask something else, but Venri jumped up and interrupted him, which caused confusion in the guy. The archer was furious that he was asking the lady too many questions and that it was too rude of him. The princess tried to calm the girl down, but it didn't help. Venri, of course, was grateful to Gelian from the bottom of her heart for saving the lady, but he said he was a simple traveler, but for some reason he didn't understand what was going on in this part of the world. The half-elf felt like the guy was hiding something. Venri's statement made the guards think. Reeve immediately reacted to it and wanted to take action, but Tsukasa stopped her. He said that he understood the archer's feelings very well. She wants to be sure that the travelers are not working with the elves. After a short silence, Venri denied his words because she had not said such a thing. Ignoring the girl's words, he continued to say that they were not ordinary travelers. The archer wanted to know what he meant with displeasure. They came from the forest of the abyss. This statement shocked everyone present in the throne room. Venri shouted and asked if they were the Demon King's minions. Gelian realized that he had been wrong to say so directly where they came from, and for the first time he heard that there was a Demon King in the Forest of the Abyss. Based on Lifa's words, they call the magical forest the Forest of the Abyss. Judging by their reaction, it is a dangerous and problematic place. The main character decided to tell that he and his companions were exploring an old castle when suddenly they were thrown into this strange forest. They wandered in this forest for 5 days. After the guy told this story, he wanted to know if the half-elves understood why he was not familiar with the situation in the country. Venri was still on guard, so she wanted to know how they had been in the forest for 5 days without supplies and necessary equipment. Tsukasa ordered Riva and Eltina to show the bags. The guy's companions began to get everything they needed for the trip. Looking at this, the princess and the archer did not understand what it was and where they were getting it from. The travelers managed to find this while exploring the ruins. The guys don't fully understand how, but these bags allow you to store a huge amount of things, despite their small volume. So the half-elves understood how they managed to survive. This bag is called a magic purse. Its feature allows you to store a huge number of things inside. In the game, it was the most ordinary thing, but due to its feature, it was considered more valuable and useful. Gelian's performance would avoid further suspicion. This was the plan that came to his mind. Misaki knows that they still don't trust him. They are suspicious that the boy spent so much time in the forest without equipment, so he decided to show the magic pouch to deflect suspicion from himself. If you think about it, there are many other factors that could raise suspicions, but they shouldn't pay attention to them because half-elves are too busy with their wallets. Tsukasa watched as the townspeople looked at the contents of the magic bags with interest and thought that everything went smoothly. He managed to distract them and refute the accusations. An unfamiliar half-elf came in from behind the screen, greeting her sister. Leifa clearly did not expect to see her. Pulling herself together, the princess introduced her younger sister, Lilifa, to the traveler. A little embarrassed, Lifa asked her sister to leave them, as she had an important conversation. The princess sheepishly apologized for her sister's behavior, promising that she would have a preventive talk with her later. Gelian asked her not to worry about it. Lilifa looked at the main character with a predatory expression, which made him puzzled, and he decided to find out what was going on. After thinking for a bit, she asked the protagonist with a sly smile if he liked the curvy shape. Lifa is outraged by her younger sister's behavior. Lilifa hid behind Gelian and asked in her defense that Mr. Traveler is a human. If so, that means he likes the curvy shape better. Tsukasa turned pale when the girl touched him. The girl didn't calm down. She repeated the question about the forms over and over again. The main character was shaking, and he started mumbling that he didn't quite understand. It corresponded to her age, I think. Then the girl feigned innocence and asked who was better, hers or her sister's. Hearing Lilifa's question, Lifa was furious. She shouted her sister's name so loudly that even those outside the throne room heard it. Afterwards, it was decided to go for a walk in the fresh air. The princess apologized to Gelian for her sister's rudeness. Feeling awkward, he asked Lifa not to apologize and thought to himself that before he could come to his senses, Lilifa was already holding his hand. But thanks to her, the guy managed to avoid further questions, but he felt so awkward and needed to find a topic for conversation. The traveler asked the half-elf how old she was. Lifa wanted to answer for her sister, but Lilifa wanted to know how old she looked according to Gelian. Misaki looked at the girl's mischievous expression and thought that elves usually looked younger than their age, so if you take that into account, he guessed that she was 13 years old. But he guessed wrong. The correct answer is 10. The guy was very surprised. The nuance was that her mother was a human and Lilith also had human blood, and everyone said that she looked a lot like her mother. Lilifa knows that she will look like her mother. Lifa didn't want to listen to the talk about her figure anymore. Her little sister wanted to draw attention to Venri, who was calling for the princess. But Lifa didn't believe her. Then Helios said that it was true, and the archer was already running towards the company. A silent dialogue arose between the girls. Lifa needed to talk to Venri, so she apologized to the guy and was about to leave. But before that, she asked her sister to stay with Mr. Gelian while she was busy. Lilifa agreed and wished him luck. And when the princess was already leaving, she reminded him not to cause inconvenience to the gentleman traveler and his companions. She left, and Misaki still wanted to find out a lot of things and now didn't know how to collect information. Perhaps Lilifa could be useful in this. The girl suddenly asked if Gelian would marry her. Helios was shocked when he heard this, and water flowed from his mouth. Spitting out the water, he asked again. Lilifa asked, as if nothing had happened, if everything was okay. Still scared, the guy said that he had simply choked and wanted to know why she would bring it up. The girl thought that he did not want to marry her. Tsukasa was lost in thought as to why she had brought it up so abruptly. Getting even more nervous, I wondered why she was proposing to the first person she met and what was wrong with her. Was he really so handsome that the young princess fell in love with the traveler at first sight? He dismissed the idea because it was definitely impossible. Impossible, no matter how you looked at it. Misaki is sad to say this, but this is too unrealistic a scenario. However, it is really happening now. It is as if he is in a dream. That's right. It is impossible to just go to another world. It is logical that all this is unrealistic. Desperate, Gelian happily agreed to Lilifa's proposal, because it was a dream anyway. But the girl denied it all, because she is the real reality, not a dream. The boy wanted them to calm down first. It was important to stay calm at times like these. But the second princess thought that he was the only one who needed to calm down here. The guy nervously replied that she should also clearly think again, because she didn't even know his name. What kind of wedding could they be talking about? Maybe it was a joke. Lilifa said that this was not a joke and asked the main character his name. After she learned his name, she asked him again if Gelian would take her as his wife. After all, she would probably have a curvy figure like her mother. Curvy like mom and better than sister. The guy nervously said that had nothing to do with it. The girl did not back down and asked if maybe he liked skinny ones. Tsukasa wanted someone to save him, and the guy was also scared by the heavy aura behind him, and he didn't want to see their faces right now, especially Reeves. That's the problem. Lifa looks more like her father. She has more elven blood. That's why she's skinny. Gelian was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and repeated again that the body has nothing to do with it. He was tired of this nonsense and was not going to waste any more time on nonsense, so he desperately asked her if she wanted to get married. The traveler couldn't do that without her parents' permission. He was willing to talk about the wedding when Lilifa's parents were saved. These words made the girl think. An old Japanese tradition of putting off your problems. It might not be the right answer, but the guy had a lot on his plate. You can't waste time on kids. Lilifa turned away and said in a lifeless voice that it would be difficult to meet mom or dad, since they were probably already gone. These words shocked Misaki. Leaf and everyone say they were just caught, but the elves really hate us half-elves. That's why they could have killed the queen, because she has a Kirby shape, not like the elves. Gelian listened silently to what was bothering her. Misaki was very wrong. The person standing before him was a frivolous child, not a real member of the royal family of Latewood. Even then, Lilifa did not immediately enter the throne room. She first watched the traveler. She was already thinking about a plan, after which she adjusted her clothes, her hair, and gathered her courage. After all the manipulations, she came in, pretending to be frivolous and funny. A young and helpless princess wonders what she can do to help her kingdom, which is on the verge of extinction. And then a traveler appears who is strong enough to save her sister. An idea immediately came to her mind: marry him. After all, she is a princess. She tried to use this to save Latestwood. What terrible thoughts she had. She was ready to give everything for her country, and Gelian considered her a frivolous child. But even so, what can he do? He is a third party who does not see the whole picture. When she turned to him, Tsukasa thought it over and admitted that he couldn't marry her. It wasn't that easy. The boy's answer upset the princess, but she accepted it with dignity. Gelian felt her desperate sadness and could not pass by, so he said that he wanted to help as much as possible. The girl clearly did not expect such an answer. He assured her that he could not do anything yet, but he would try very hard. There were tears of happiness on Lilifa's face. It was enough for her that he would make at least some effort. Looking at her, Misaki thought that her smile was different from her usual forced grin. This was her sincere smile. Gelian promised that he would do everything in his power, and as proof he would swear on his little fingers. The girl was confused and thought that she would have to cut off her finger. But the main character calmed her down. It was like a magical oath so that the guy wouldn't break his promise. They linked their little fingers and Lilifa didn't know what to do next. Tsukasa knelt down and assured, knelt down and assured. Now the oath was sealed. Reeve prepared everything necessary for cooking, standing over a large cauldron. The wolf was cooking right in the middle of the square. The townspeople were watching her, wondering who she was, a beastman, perhaps an adventurer. But those in the know explained that she was one of the travelers that Lady Lifa had spoken of. Kilios watched his companion's actions with interest. She added spices such as cinnamon, salt, and black pepper to the food. People gathered to watch Riva's actions as if it were a performance. She used the spell Ignite to start cooking the dish. After some time, the cooking was coming to an end, and the aroma of the food spread throughout the city. More and more residents learned that someone was cooking food in the square and that a pleasant aroma was coming from there. Lilifa suddenly approached the she-wolf and asked if the food was ready. Riva replied that the food was almost ready and offered to try it. Without saying a word, the princess reached out to the ladle in anticipation and tried the dish. The eyes of Lifa's younger sister shone with pleasure. The traveler noticed that the girl liked it, and that was the most important thing. Reeve offered to eat, putting a portion of food in a bowl. Lilifa did not expect such generosity, but the she-wolf explained that feeding everyone who wanted to was an order from Gelian. The princess was grateful for the help, and before eating, she said a prayer, thanking the sacred tree for its grace. The hard-working half-elf was hungry. Someone from the locals said that perhaps they were serving food in the square. When the princess finished her portion, she began to call the people so that they could eat. More and more creatures began to pay attention to the princess's calls. Someone noticed that Lady Lilith liked it, so it was okay to eat. Riv was handing out food, and one of the townspeople admired the dish, as this food was even tastier than what was in the castle. While the she-wolf was busy, Gelian watched her and wondered if he should say that it seemed that the food situation in Latewood was very bad. Because they took in those who fled the capital, the settlement now has far more people than it can feed. It is clear that if this continues for a few more weeks, the food situation will inevitably get worse. Lifa's appearance distracted Tsukasa from his thoughts and thanked him on behalf of all the villagers for this treat. He only awkwardly said that he did what he could. Changing the topic, the guy asked that there were supposedly legends associated with the Lord of Darkness in the Bottomless Forest. The princess nodded, because if you turn to the legends of the elves, you can find out that it is believed that this was once the dwelling place of the Lord of Darkness. Moreover, there are quite a few legends, such as the Forest of Illusions, other lands from which travelers come, the Forbidden World of the Dead, and others. Therefore, since ancient times, the Bottomless Forest has been considered a forbidden territory. But even if there were no such legends, there are no such eccentrics among the elves and half-elves who would want to approach the Bottomless Forest. The traveler wanted to study this issue in more detail. The princess was clearly not pleased to remember the horrors of this place, but she continued to explain. From time to time, magical beasts come from the Bottomless Forest. Such a beast has the strength of a whole pack of magical beasts from an ordinary forest. It happens that sometimes entire squads are formed to fight it, but even this rarely turns out to be successful. Misaki asked what happens if they fail to get rid of the beast. Lifa added that it usually goes on a rampage for a while, after which it returns back to the Bottomless Forest. For the forest dwellers, it's like a natural disaster. They can only hide and wait until it passes. Helios was shocked by the princess's words, but realized that it was stupid to ask why you built a city in such a dangerous place. It seemed that this piece of land was the only place where the oppressed half-elves were able to settle. The boy asked if there were any other races who were not afraid to approach the bottomless forest. Such people are found among people. They are called adventurers, Lifa explained. Tsukasa had not heard of adventurers before while in the game. They come to collect special resources from the bottomless forest. There are also some outstanding adventurers who deliberately seek out magical beasts in the forest. This is probably because the beasts of the abyss are rich in magical power, and many creatures become a source of special resources. The traveler clarified that this meant that groups of adventurers were coming to Latestwood of their own free will. This was true, although from the half-elves' point of view it was madness. And yet, when they stop for the night, they pay in foreign currency. So, the townspeople are grateful that the adventurers drop in. Gelian called this a completely reasonable policy. If money circulates only within the country, it will lead to a halt in development. Trade is necessary. The guy looked around and did not see a single adventurer. They weren't in Latewood right now. It seemed like about a month ago a horde of monsters attacked a border town not far from here. As a result, an emergency meeting was announced. All the adventurers gathered and went to the border town. The attack was very serious, so the situation was becoming difficult. And 3 weeks ago, Noblewood declared war on our country. Right after those events, a very inopportune moment. The guy was curious about this border town. It turned out to be a frontline town built by humans on the border with demon territory. It is called the Shield of Humanity. To some extent, the protagonist expected this. Many things were not even mentioned in the game. The demon race existed in Tactics Chronicle as well. In fact, Camilla, the commander of the 6th Corps, could also be called one of them. But then again, Misaki had never heard of the demon territory. Tsukasa still wanted to ask about a lot of things, but his head was already so full that it was about to explode. The locals thanked the she-wolf for the food she had prepared. Gelian was glad that his team had been well received in the city. While observing the inhabitants, he noticed 2 children talking to each other. To be on the safe side, the boy asked Lifa that the girl's body was quite small and whether she was a warrior cat. The girl confirmed, but added that she was small because she was half-halfling. There are so many races in this city. It seems there are many half-breeds. Tsukasa was very surprised to see dwarves. After all, elves and dwarves can't stand each other. The guy noted that apparently everything is different in Latewood. Leaf liked Gelian's interest and said that this country was undoubtedly founded mostly by half-elves. But Latestwood was built by the combined efforts of the various races of that time. Those who were weak and had no one to rely on huddled together. And, as a result, they started a new country. The main character, having heard Leifa's story, thought that it was an amazing country. The princess looked around with delight and added that this was a proud country. Then, while the wolf finished distributing the food, Gelian and Leifa talked about all sorts of trivialities. Deep down, the boy was afraid that she would ask for Riv and Eltina as valuable warriors. To his surprise, she did not even touch on this topic. Favored food, hobbies, that Lilifa has been spoiled since childhood and has poor manners. The couple did not talk about anything significant at all. When Leifa smiled, even in such a difficult situation, she gave the impression of a true leader. Could the protagonist behave the same way when cornered in a similar situation? He has no confidence in that. Reeve reassured the princess that everything was fine, she would do everything herself. But Leifa did not want to make her guests clean up after they had arranged a mini-feast. At that moment, little girls ran up to them and asked the princess to play with them. Gelian remembered that he was not a traveler, but the ruler of Archimaira. This made him become serious. He opened a virtual chat window. Tsukasa opened a correspondence with the captain of the 2nd Corps, Baron Seyfried. Misaki was afraid that he would not be able to contact the captains outside the bottomless forest. Fortunately, it seems that this is not a problem. Outsiders cannot see the virtual window. To them, it looks as if Gelian is simply looking up at the sky. Gelian sent a message to Seyfried, saying that somehow they had successfully established contact with the locals. He asked if there had been any changes or if any new problems had arisen. Then he sent this message. The townspeople chatted among themselves while enjoying their food. They clearly enjoyed the noble gesture of the travelers. Eltina was enjoying the way Riv was interacting with the youngest princess. Suddenly, a glass fell. The elf and the wolf immediately reacted to it. They looked at the main character in silent question because they could not see the virtual window. The guy, in turn, froze from what he saw. Leifa, despite Reva's refusals, helped with the cleaning, but still noticed Gelian's condition and called out to him. If the happiness level remains extremely low, the loyalty level will fall below a certain value, and then there is a chance that a violent rebellion will be raised. In this game, there is a system of rebellions of subordinates. Seeing the uprising sign in the system window, the protagonist immediately went back to his country. At that moment, in Archimaira, some ogre was waving a weapon and urging the soldiers to fight against him. While fighting with his opponents, one of the commanders wanted to have a lot of fun before the arrival of the commander-in-chief. Quickly covering the distance to the capital, Gelian remembered how, switching to a shout, he told Leaf that an emergency call had been received from an ally through the magical artifact and that he needed to contact them immediately. He also asked permission to apologize for his rudeness later. The princess did not understand anything, but it upset her very much. In tension, they continued to move to arrive as soon as possible. Gelian sent a message saying that the throne must be protected until he returns. No one should be allowed to touch it. Riv apologized for her rudeness, or rather for the fact that she picked up the hero in order to get there faster. But it didn't matter, and the guy knew it. She was too strict about the rules of etiquette, and they tenderly immediately returned to the castle. Tsukasa tried not to panic. It was impossible to rely on only 3 people being captured. A rebel takeover of the throne will not result in immediate destruction, but when combined with the decrease in happiness and morale, there will be significant limitations on the king's powers, starting with a virtual window of authority. For the main character, this could be fatal. And this time, the rebellion broke out not in local cities, but in the capital of the empire. In addition to losing the throne, if certain conditions are met, this will ultimately be considered a success of the revolution. Then it would be the end of the empire. Misaki was in despair at what was happening, because it was wonderful what this could lead to. The country ruled by the human king will be destroyed, and the corresponding player's character data will be completely deleted. Revolutionary success would, in other words, mean total defeat. What awaits Tsukasa then, and what will happen to him? Will he die? The boy tried to think that all this was a dream. He needed to hear from someone that it was just a dream. There was a fierce war between the revolutionaries and the king's soldiers. No one wanted to lose to the other side. Enjoying the fight, the commander of the 5th Corps, Gardy Bergelmir, was indignant that the opponents were too weak. His words only angered the ogres, although this was exactly what he wanted. Gardy wanted to know if they could stop him, and if the enemy really wanted to compete with him, then it would be best to call Reeve as well. The teen quickly reached the capital. The castle was already in sight. Gelian wanted to know if there was a battle going on inside the castle, but the elf assured him that everything was calm in the castle and the battle was going on somewhere in the surrounding area. Hearing this, the boy gave orders to Reeve to avoid the battlefield and head to the castle first. The wolf obeyed and headed straight to the throne room. The commander flew into the castle at full speed, holding the commander-in-chief in her arms. Altina landed right behind them. Gelian gave the order to continue moving towards the throne. The soldiers noticed the approach of their king. They began to greet him and were glad of his return. One of them gave the order to part and announced the arrival of His Majesty. The protagonist wanted to know what the situation was. The ram was a little taken aback when he saw his commander. Gelian, all agitated, repeated his question about the situation and added whether anyone had tried to touch his throne. Seyfried reported that as soon as they received his order, they immediately began to defend the throne. At the same time, they gathered additional elite troops. No one touched the throne. Tsukasa sensed danger and looked at the 3 commanders and asked what about the other commanders. And who is the traitor, the ram on the side of the commander-in-chief? If he was a traitor, the throne would have been seized by now. Likewise with Reeve and Altina, there is no sign of betrayal either. Then what about the other commanders? Some of them have their own characteristic. There are those who have egoism, enjoyment, and arrogance. In addition, there are those who are inclined to chaos by nature. For example, Altina's characteristic quality is harmony. That's what I prefer. It has a positive effect in order to eliminate conflict between subordinates. On the other hand, there is chaos, which can cause one to commit absurd acts, disregarding the impact on others. Moreover, among the 8 commanders, there is even one who has a tendency toward evil. To deal with the rebels, the commander of the 5th Corps acts independently, leading his own detachment and part of the force of the 6th Corps. The remaining corps commanders still continued to follow the orders of the commander-in-chief. Since the protagonist thought that the traitor was one of the commanders, he did not expect to hear such a report from Baran. Now he was interested in the situation with the rebels, and who had caused the uprising. Seyfried said it was a group of ogres, the same ones that attacked the day before the Foundation Day celebration when they immediately surrendered. Gardy held the line with Camilla. She didn't like what he was doing, because using her subordinates, he destroyed everything in the area. The man didn't want to listen to her. He enjoyed the battle. By advising her not to think about it, Gardy hoped that the ogres would not come again. Once Gelian knew that none of his commanders were traitors, he sat down and exhaled from the tension he had been feeling all this time. Baran noticed this and hurried to find out what was going on, but the guy brushed it off, saying that he was just a little tired. Tsukasa didn't know if his fears were unfounded. It seemed that he couldn't stand up straight due to the shock. If you recall, Misaki had been desperately holding on to Reeve the entire way to avoid falling, so there was nothing surprising about it. The wolf wagged her tail as she recalled holding His Majesty in her arms. Noticing this, the commander of the second squad said that, surprisingly, she was in a good mood. Reeve decided to deny everything. She only said that how, in the midst of the uprising, he could talk about being in a good mood. It was strange for her to hear this, because saying thoughtless things was not in Baran's spirit. Seyfried's face showed doubt, because her tail was still happily wagging. To make her point, the she-wolf added that, looking at everything that was happening, how could this even happen? The suppression of the rebellion was complete. Then Gelian went to inspect the state of the city. However, the presence of the ogres there meant that the intention to suppress the rebellion resulting from the Foundation Day celebration was interrupted. By the way, if the king is absent, while everything in the country is quiet and peaceful, even stupid ogres can manage to stage an uprising. When Tsukasa surveyed the battlefield, he was not pleased to see the aftermath. After all, this horrific picture is too realistic. There is no censorship control of the ethical code that the game is supposed to have. Bergelmir saw the commander-in-chief and was glad to see them. He pointed around him, demonstrating that the rebellion had been suppressed. Gelian praised the commander of the Fifth Corps. Gardy began to actively refuse praise and was ready to bear any punishment, because from the very beginning he was unable to prevent the outbreak of a riot. Tsukasa asked him not to worry, as the commander had protected the city well. The protagonist was interested in where the leader of the rebellion was. Pointing to a house, Bergelmir said that it seemed the ogre was lying there. Gelian approached the culprit and saw a disfigured, unconscious ogre. It is simply unbearable to look him in the face. Although, in a sense, the main character himself wanted this result. It is unacceptable to look away, because this can show his weakness in front of his subordinates. At this time, Riv was scolding the man, because she had long turned a blind eye to Gardy's manner of speaking to Mr. Gelian. The commander was only irritated that the she-wolf started this conversation again. The man stood his ground, and everyone except the commander forgave him for his rude manner of speech, even now. The girl couldn't let this situation go so easily, so she continued. She said that there was a limit to everything. Moreover, one had to maintain at least a drop of decency in front of one's soldiers. Gardy thought of a way to avoid exclamations and asked the commander-in-chief if he could go now, since the processing and disposal of corpses would take place here. Bergelmir did not want to listen to Riv's moralizing any longer, so he demonstratively turned around and walked away. The she-wolf was furious at his childishness, because she had not finished their conversation yet. Eltina tried to stop their quarrel, but Gelian would hear no more, so he ordered Reeve and Gardy to stop fooling around. In an instant, the leader of the rebellion woke up and attacked the main character. The she-wolf reacted instantly and immediately ran to protect her master. In Tactics Chronicle, the weakest creature is the king. Therefore, he does not have the techniques necessary to avoid attacks from close range. Death is confirmed at the moment of surprise attack. But how did this happen? In the moment after the blow, Misaki was hysterical, first denying everything, then realizing that he would soon die. But he was dying, although he did not want to, asking for help that would not come. Reeve didn't have time to help. The blow landed on the head. When the three commanders approached, it was too late. The king was lying on the ground. The girl held the ogre by the neck to make sure he was dead. She turned around, and when she saw Gelian on the ground, she went into hysterics. Thus, the weakest king, Gelian, betrayed by the people of his own country, died. Tsukasa Misaki, video dream. It dawned on him that this could all be a dream. It's as if the enemy troops are still pursuing, and this army is huge. From elves and dwarves to demons, devils, fairies, and magical beasts. And the very last, a herd of dragons, an amorphous non-human race, similar to slime and ghosts. All sorts of races were gathered in one place, and it was a mixed core of representatives of different races, which the boy vaguely remembered. And, on the other side, the soldiers under command. There are few of them. 3 figures for 8 places. Moreover, 2 of them have already been destroyed. The only thing Gelian had left in his hands was a beautifully crafted wolf figure. In other words, that was all his power. There was no chance of winning. For Tsukasa Misaki, Tactics Chronicle was a dreamlike world of fantasy. That's why he continued to pursue his ideals while searching for romance and teaching his close friends. And the result of further progress was, in short, the end point of sleep, which is completely compressed, and from here it is impossible to return back. No matter how strong the final, main figure was, it would still be mercilessly destroyed with a combat power difference of 100,000 to 1. Even the main character, determined as he was, destroyed other cities, and spun a story that lasted 150 years, thinking that someday his turn would come. And now that this moment had come, without showing off his clumsiness, Gelian was ready for the finale. But of course, he was scared. It's bloody scary. The guy actually witnessed this horrific ending. It's emotionally draining, but this is not what was promised. In the miniature garden that Tsukasa Misaki loved, there was no such terrible reality. This was supposed to be a world of dreams and fantasies, and the game itself was supposed to be fun. But if you look up, there is darkness, complete, bottomless darkness. The main character continued to have a nightmare. He saw that same ogre, that same bloody, deadly weapon. He rose up on the bed with a wild cry, and next to him sat his most devoted ally. Gelian was in unbearable pain. He did not unbearable pain. He did not understand what was happening and where he was. Finally, he stopped screaming and began to come to his senses, looking around. He asked if he was in the royal bedroom. Looking at him, the she-wolf held back her excitement as best she could. Riv tried, but her feelings burst out, and she began to cry. Seeing this, Gelian became scared and called out to her. But the girl did not pay attention. She felt relief when the master finally woke up. After seeing her reaction and looking around again, Tsukasa began to feel hopeless. Maybe he was dreaming, maybe he wasn't. He couldn't understand what was going on. The protagonist is sure that he was heading to the place where the uprising was being suppressed. Then that same enraged ogre flashed in his memories, and he remembered. However, what happened, he was recently killed. Gelian was too excited to just sit. Jumping up, he began to shout about ogres and that something strange happened to the rebels. Frightened by the active actions of the master, Reeve tries to calm him down. Tsukasa shouldn't get out of bed since he slept for more than half the day. Gelian didn't understand anything. What madness, he didn't remember falling asleep at all. This probably means it wasn't a dream. Most likely, these were his own memories. Having put the whole picture together in his head, Misaki already knew the answer, but he still asked the wolf if he was killed by that red ogre. Reeve didn't want to say it, but she still confirmed his words. The protagonist exhaled and lay back down. He hypothesized that the automatic revival had worked. In Tactics Chronicle, the death of the king does not immediately end the game. The king can be resurrected if he is killed, but there is a limit to what he can do. In other words, Gelian was killed once and then resurrected. Misaki turned to the girl wearily and asked if the throne was safe and what happened to the rebels and that red window. Reeve asked not to worry, because the throne is completely safe, and at the moment the elite of the Second Corps under the command of Baran has strengthened its defense, and this time every single rebel was destroyed. As for their leader, it seemed he had unique abilities. Hearing this, the guy immediately opened a virtual window. The Red Ogre had the ability Last Strike. In more detail, upon its own death, activates a normal attack. If there are enemy units in the radius, performs a sneak attack on the closest one. After reading this, Tsukasa ponders over the enemy's ability. He is intrigued by the fact that he can only counterattack once after dying. Controlling the dead man's own body was a success. The commander of the 5th Corps, Gardy, was firmly convinced that he had destroyed all the rebels. Therefore, Reeve and Eltina were not on guard. However, standing next to the ogre that had unique abilities was Gelian. He acted carelessly as he approached him. Suddenly, Riva began to apologize to the guy. She got down on one knee and said that even though she was supposed to protect him, she had let him down. It was unforgivable, and she had no excuse. The wolf was ready to accept any punishment and begged the protagonist to do it. It was painful for Misaki to look at her. Reeve continued to kneel and await her punishment. Gelian looked at her for a long time, but then turned away to figure out what to do next. In the end, he called the she-wolf to him. The girl was scared because she was preparing for the worst, and yet Reeve took a step forward, but the guy asked her to come closer and sit on the bed. She silently obeyed the master. The wolf's head was filled with a million versions of what His Majesty could do to her, but she was just waiting for the punishment. In the end, she saw his hand reaching for her. She felt sad and scared. Time had treacherously slowed down, so Rin closed her eyes. Gelian placed his hand on her head. Her snow-white hair was magnificently thick. The she-wolf expected everything, but not this. Tsukasa began to stroke her hair, touch her ears. He gently touched the back of her head and pulled her towards him, feeling the beating of his heart. Touching his forehead to Rin, he could hear the sound of his heart, how fast and loud it was beating. It is unknown how long they sat like that, maybe a second, or maybe an eternity. Her cheeks are flushed, the smell is faint, the hair feels soft to the touch, the sound of a heartbeat, and also the taste of tears is slightly salty. How embarrassed the she-wolf looked. This image clearly indicates that there is no impending threat. There is no horde of monsters surrounding the throne. All the leaders of the 8 Corps are alive and well, and the country is safe. What Misaki saw earlier was just a dream. However, if you remember everything that is happening now, unfortunately, it turns out not to be a dream. Gelian came to his senses after a moment of weakness and asked if there was anything else serious besides the ogre uprising. The wolf was too embarrassed to think. She stuttered and could not really say anything. Gelian asked her to slow down and calm down. There are many small problems, but nothing serious that could shake the country. This gave the commander-in-chief hope, but he needed to know what about the other commanders. Reeve had fully recovered and clearly answered that they were still carrying out royal orders. Eltina and Gardy give instructions to their army and wait for further orders from Gelian. The guy thought about what to do after hearing this. The commander of the 5th Corps will still be responsible for maintaining public order. In case there is another uprising, Reeve will need to be handed over to the commanders to act at their own discretion unless Gelian gives any instructions. Tsukasa was definitely killed at that moment during the event that was Gardei's responsibility. As for the earlier incident, I wonder if it had been anyone else who would have been able to predict the ogre's counterattack. Here, too, as everywhere, there is no limit to human capabilities. The commander of the 3rd Corps will oversee the affairs related to the destruction of buildings and the wounded during the uprising. And it is also necessary to establish cooperation between the corps. They must act as necessary within the framework of Gelian's instructions. The commander of the 2nd Corps must finish the business with the rebellion. As for the defense of the throne, it is already possible to return to the usual mode. After giving the orders, Misaki realized that he was hungry. Reeve responded immediately and promised to organize everything as soon as possible. There is such a thing as role-playing game. This is when a person plays according to his own established rules. If the king simply talks frivolously, then his worldview is boring. It is only natural that Tsukasa Misaki also simply goes with the flow, adhering to the rules of the role-playing game. By this time, the table setting was finished and the dishes were placed on the table. But Gelian wanted to say something else. So, in order to learn how to behave like a king, learning the etiquette of eating in the real world was the right decision. While the commander-in-chief was thinking about his own things, he had to talk with the servants. The tea tasted sweet. Previously, when the guy drank in the game Tactics Chronicle, he did not feel any taste, but he felt this one back when he drank the drink in Latewood. The main character wanted to go back home. He wanted to return to reality. Of course, he devoted most of his youth to Tactics Chronicle. However, it was his additional entertainment, and the guy really loved this game. That's why he wants to return to the real world. But first, he needs to figure out the reason for the transformation. But even if we put forward a hypothesis, there is too little basic information. What is the difference between the game and the real world? At first, you can use all kinds of ordinary window masks. There are functions that provide information exchange and tactics that are used for information and combat support. The point is that in Tactics Chronicle, other people cannot see the virtual window. As for the exchange of information with this, there seem to be no problems. But it is unknown what about the revival of subordinates. In the game, you can revive not only players, but also monsters. But unlike them, the king has a slightly different specificity, and there are quite a few restrictions. Firstly, you can only revive citizens of your own country or satellite countries. But again, only those monsters whose full names are known to the player can be resurrected. Moreover, monsters that have been dead for more than 24 hours will not be resurrected. And as a final limitation, there is an upper limit on the number of revivals. The total number is 2 times per subordinate. All they know about the current situation is that the capital is surrounded by a dangerous forest called the Bottomless Forest, and that Latestwood and Noblewood are currently in the midst of an interracial conflict. In this vicinity, the forces of only 2 powerful countries are concentrated. In terms of the balance of power of each country existing in this world, what is the position of Archimaira in relative comparison with national power? Also, the country's internal politics cannot be ignored for long, since there has already been one uprising. It will be dangerous if the country's internal problems are not solved along with the research. If another rebellion occurs, this time the number of revivals will be limited. The same applies to the king. The life reserve is up to 6 lives. Since Gelian recently died, there are 5 left. If he dies 5 more times, the 5th death will be the same as the final one. In other words, in Tactics Chronicle, this means game over, and deletion of all character data. In short, if the protagonist uses up all of his life points, then he will actually die. The guy stood up from the table and looked thoughtfully out the window. Misaki wanted to check one more thing. Tsukasa collected his thoughts and asked Reeve a question about how the girl might not understand his intentions, but she needed to answer how she thought the wolf treated the weak. Gelian was interested in Reeve's opinion of those weaker than her, such as Rafe, whom they had helped the other day. The girl thinks. She comes to the conclusion that she still considers Rafa strong. The young man asks if she really thinks Rafa is strong. Gelian believed that Rafa's fighting ability was significantly inferior to hers. Reeve confirmed that if they fought, she would definitely win. Even if these fights were fought 1,000 times, the result would always be the same. She was sure that Rafa and everyone else understood that. Reeve added that she never behaved in a mean or low manner. After arriving in the village, Latestwood experienced the hardest times. Despite the difficulties, the villagers continually gathered. Even those who were inferior in strength were drawn into an unwanted war. According to Reeve, the reason they did not despair probably lay in the upbringing and behavior they received. Reeve noticed how Rafa remained upright despite her weakness, and that was why she thought she was strong. The girl asked whether such a lifestyle was considered a manifestation of strength. Gelian insisted that in terms of combat capability, Rafa was still weaker than Reeve. He asked if she had ever considered the term law of nature, and that she was superior to Rafa in terms of life. Reeve replies that she didn't think about it. The young man asks why. The girl explained that she was a resident of Archimaira. At a young age, she was a weak monster, but Gelian did not abandon her and continued to raise her. Reeve considered the idea of hunting the weak to be blasphemous. She was convinced that she should follow not the law of the strong against the weak, but the law of Archimaira, which he himself created. This time the rebellion was quickly suppressed, but it will start again if Gelian is deemed unworthy of the title of king. Only the betrayal of a few commanders can harm the entire nation. However, it was wrong to suspect everyone. The fear of betrayal led to tragedy. If you rule the state, looking into the faces of your subordinates, sooner or later you will collapse. It was like suicide. Gelian looked out the window thoughtfully, pondering Reeve's point of view. He decides to never doubt the girl in order to maintain his royal title. Of all his subordinates, only Reeve could earn his complete trust. The young man wondered what would happen if his loyal vassal ever abandoned him. If this happens, it will become impossible to rule in the future. He addresses the girl by name. Gelian announced that a meeting would be held with each commander in 5 hours. He asked Reeve to pass this information on to all commanders, except those who were busy performing their duties. The girl nodded, assuring him that she understood everything and would carry out his instructions. She added that she would immediately inform him of her actions. The girl straightened her hair. She replied that she would do her best to live up to his expectations. With these words, she left the room. Left alone, Gelian turned to the virtual map to check the current situation. Looking at the data on the capital, he noticed that the level of happiness of the people was lower than in the previous check. The young man assumed that this was probably due to the fact that the residents were still under stress due to the transformation phenomenon. He was sure that this problem could not be ignored. Gelian thought that the best way to deal with this situation was to eliminate the cause of the stress itself, but this did not guarantee that people would be able to return to their previous lives. The young man thought about how best to conduct the meeting. As he stepped out onto the balcony, he reflected that by using key language and saying certain words, he could achieve a positive effect that would make the meeting successful. However, based on his conversation with Reeve in the office, he came to the conclusion that the key language itself did not have much meaning. Gelian decided that he would try to play the situation in such a way as to dispel public anxiety with his performance. 5 hours flew by unnoticed, and now the time had come to gather for the meeting. The meeting begins. The Archimaira army and all 8 commanders gathered in full force, preparing to discuss current issues. The commanders of the 8 Corps knelt before King Gelian. The first was the commander of the 1st Corps, the commander of the Guard Army, a moonwolf named Reeve. Next to her stood the commander of the 2nd Corps, the head of the Knightly Order of Beasts, a lion with a sword named Baran. Following in command of the 3rd Corps was the leader of the detachment of the Holy Spirit, a white fairy of the Age of Gods named Eltina. The 4th was commanded by the Dark Elf Ceres, the leader of the army of mages, and the 5th by Gardi, the leader of the army of ogres. The commander of the army of demons, the Night Princess Incubus named Camilla, represented the 6th Corps. The 7th Corps was represented by the half-breed Robin, the leader of the military engineering. And finally, the commander of the 8th Corps, the Twilight Dragon Nogard, represented the squad of Sky Dragons. Gelian thanked them for their work and allowed them to rise. After that, he was about to explain the reasons why they had all gathered together. The young man said that he had already heard something from Riv about the strength of the elves and half-elves living on this land, but despite this, they still did not have a complete understanding of the continent as a whole. Gelian checked the virtual windows for the information he needed, but unfortunately he couldn't find it. He couldn't confirm the familiar terrain on the map. It was very different from the continent they were originally on. All the commanders looked at the king with interest, and he invited them not to be shy and ask questions. Riv, curiously, asked what virtual windows and maps were. Gelian explained that a virtual window is a panel invisible to other people. A map is one type of virtual window. They are used to obtain geospatial information needed for decision-making. The commanders listened attentively to their king's explanations. The boy wondered if they realized that his abilities went beyond ordinary magic, and whether it would be worth leaving a little mystery in them to reduce the risk of rebellion among the disaffected. He continued, saying that they had received a lot of information from Latestwood, but it was still not enough. Gelian wondered if there was a power on the continent that could rival them. It remained a mystery to them. The situation was serious, and the young man considered it necessary to gather more information in order to, as before, determine their positions and build a further political course. Gelian began by emphasizing how much effort had gone into suppressing the rebellion. Gardi, declaring that he had no excuse for nearly killing his boss, expressed his willingness to accept any punishment. The king agreed. He instructed the head of the 5th Corps, as well as the entire corps under the command of the 7th Corps, to provide financial assistance to those who lost their homes and to begin building temporary housing for the victims. Gelian added that if there were any problems with public safety, command would be transferred to the head of the 2nd Corps, Baran. Gardi and Baran exchanged glances. Transferring command was not an easy matter. The king called out to Gardi, asking if he would agree to obey Baran's orders as a form of punishment. Gelian wondered to himself if his decision had been too cruel. The young man noted that there was nothing that could be done about this incident. He understood how difficult it was to deal with the situation, but as a ruler, he was obliged to assign rewards and punishments. Gardi was still silent, and Gelian asked if he wanted to respond to his words. The ogre commander asked if this was really all a punishment. This time, Gelian could not hold back, and asked sharply what exactly Gardi was unhappy with. Gardi hastened to assure the king that he had not expressed himself correctly, and that he understood what the supreme commander wanted. Gelian calmed down. The king then turned to Reeve and Althena, charging them to do their duty to the best of their ability, adding that they would talk about punishment later. The young man informed the assembled that he would like to have Reeve and Althena as his guards during his next visit to Latestwood. At the moment, Latestwood remained the most important and only source of information, and if they visited him again, security would need to be ensured, as he was taking on the role of negotiator. Gelian also ordered Camilla to come with him, emphasizing that she would not be required to perform protective duties, and that he wanted the demon army commander to search for useful information in the settlements of Latticewood. Camilla agreed, stating that this was her specialty. Gelian believed that when it came to gathering information, she had no equal. He even called her Archimaira's ears, expecting the succubus princess to be able to fulfill this role and demonstrate her incredible abilities. Camilla knelt before the king and promised that she would certainly live up to his expectations. Gelian could not understand why she looked at him with such trepidation. All the commanders turned their gaze to their master, awaiting further instructions. Gelian noticed that all of his commanders had blazing determination in their eyes, and wondered what was behind that powerful energy. However, Camilla stood out from the crowd, looking at the others with a satisfied smile. This puzzled him a little, and he spent some time thinking, trying to figure out what it could mean. Eventually, he came to an important decision. Turning to Riv, his trusted friend and close advisor, he called her Archimaira's eyes. As someone close to the king, she had spent a lot of time with him, and Gelian had asked her to watch his every move closely. The claws of Archimaira he called Barana, his commander, who, although he did not use all his weapons, still sowed confusion among the enemies. Gelian was confident that, in the event of an emergency, Barana would show her power with all her strength and responsibility. Eltine, who plays a central role in the internal affairs of Archimaira, he called the Mane of Archimaira, which will be able to demonstrate their greatness to other states. The language of Archimaira became Sarah's, who wields magic and creates various techniques. Gelian was sure that even the earth itself could turn to ashes under the melody of her speech. Gardy, with his incredible strength and powerful physique, became the Archimaira's hand. Robin, who supports the state with a multitude of devices and technologies, was called by Gelian the Archimaira's legs. He was confident that weapons created using advanced technology would give their forces even more power. Nogard, who controls the dragons that soar into the skies of battlefields, has become the wings of Archimaira. Gelian asked him to continue to demonstrate their country's greatest firepower, and Nogard nodded in agreement. Gelian called them to action, as the kingdom was now in danger. He was determined and knew that the time had come to act. The meeting ended, and he dismissed his military advisors. At this time, a village lost in the depths of the forest was attacked. A small elf, full of anger. He was grabbed by the hair and demanded to be released. Shouts and noise were heard from all sides. The commander-in-chief Hunter was informed that the village was under control and that no travelers had been seen here. He was also informed that something resembling a royal desecration had been captured. The girl, kneeling with her hands and head in stocks, tried to speak, but her words came out as only unintelligible sounds. The little elf, in a rage, demanded that Lady Lilith be released, declaring that he would not forgive the enemies if there was even the slightest scratch on her. Meanwhile, the hunter contemptuously called her a half-breed and mockingly asked what she was babbling about. The elf looked at her with disdain, muttering through his teeth that his ears were already rotting from her chatter. As they left behind them a multitude of lights sparkling among the treetops. The hunter was sure that this message was enough. Camilla walked next to Gelian, holding his arm. Reeve, watching them, couldn't help but ask if she was too close to the master. The girl just smiled and replied that she was simply doing the best she could. She then asked Reeve to be quiet and not interfere with her work on the aura, since Gelian had ordered her to play the role of a helpless friend lost in the abyss. She also added that she would not tolerate anyone putting a spoke in her wheel. Gelian, interrupting their conversation, gave the order to both of them not to get carried away with empty chatter, because they were approaching the settlement and everyone needed to be on their guard. Riv suddenly became wary, and Gelian, noticing this, asked what was wrong. The girl replied that she smelled blood. He clarified what she meant. Reeve, certain that something evil had happened in the settlement, sensed the impending chaos. Not wanting to waste time, Gelian gave the order to run faster, and Riv ran as fast as she could. When they reached the village, Gelian gritted his teeth in anger at the sight of the devastated area. There were signs of battle everywhere, and many wounded. People tried to help those who needed bandages. The young man looked around, not understanding what all this meant. He asked Eltina to attend to the wounded, and she nodded politely, accepting his order. Suddenly, they heard the sound of approaching arrows. Archers emerged from the cover of trees and aimed their bows at Gelian. Reeve deftly intercepting an arrow flying towards the young man. The archer girl, with a displeased expression on her face, remarked that she did not want to be teased, assuring them that they were Noblewood supporters. Someone from their group shouted her name, Venri, asking her to lower her bow. Lady Leifa told Venri that Gelian was not an enemy. She ordered her to lower her bow, but Venri was sure that they were lying and just gathering information about them. Venri added that everything that happened to Lady Lilifa was their fault. Gelian was amazed, and memories of the little girl who had once played on the shore came to his mind. He wondered anxiously what had happened to Lilifa. Venri gave a determined order to the archers to be ready for action, but she was stopped again. Lady Leifa reminded that she was now the queen of this country, and that Venri must listen to her orders. Gelian, taking advantage of the moment, asked to be heard and insistently suggested that Eltina be allowed to take care of the wounded, since that was the most important thing now. Leifa thanks him sincerely, but they have too many wounded, and it would be great to save the lives of at least some of them. Eltina asks her not to worry about it. She turns to the heavenly rain, asking it to be merciful and answer the prayers of these people by healing them. The girl casts a spell, and at that very moment, a magical dome with an intricate pattern appears above their heads. Magical light pours down from the sky onto the wounded. A magical light touches their skin, and the wounded are surprised to realize that they are being healed. They stretch out their hands to the streams of light and rejoice. Gelian announces that these people are now okay and asks if there are any more wounded. He is shown several rows of wounded lying on the ground and covered with sheets. The magical light touches the legs of the wounded. Venri watches as the funeral pyre engulfs the bodies of the dead. Reeve cannot hold back her tears. Gelian asks Lady Leifa if the enemies really demanded that the traveler and the elf be handed over before sunset the next day. The girl confirms that they will return Lilifa and the others in exchange for the residents of Latewood. King Gelian wants to make it clear that he has figured out all the circumstances of what happened, and adds that they have nothing to do with Noblewood. Lady Leifa knows this. She says that since they met, she has never doubted it for a minute. The girl adds that Gelian saved her back in the forest. The elf whose army attacked them last night is the commander of the hunt, and his name is Noblerif, Saravan Vert. Gelian is not used to such a title. Lady Leifa explains that in human armies he would be called a general, one of the key positions in elven military affairs. Leifa explains to Gelian that there is also an elder and a great elder and a great elder. In wartime, a hunter leads the soldiers. Gelian asks why Eltina was targeted by the hunter. They had a falling out with the commander-in-chief, who mentioned the name of Riva, who nearly killed him. Mrs. Leaf apologizes, saying that she does not know all the details. They stand and look at the funeral pyre. Gelian is reserved and silent, while Leifa's eyes are filled with sadness. The young man thinks, he doubts that the enemies attacked without reason, and asks Lady Leifa if she wants to tell him something important. The girl answers in the affirmative. She has information that she wants to convey to Gelian. Bowing deeply, she asks him to release the girl who was kidnapped by Noblewood, Lilifu, and the others. The young man understands that they will not be let go so easily. Leifa is desperate. She admits that it is beyond her power. If they obey Noblewood's orders, they will only bring more troubles upon Latestwood. Gelian realizes that Latestwood's life as a country is coming to an end. An attack early in the war left them with half their soldiers dead and their queen captured. A rescue mission is a last resort. Even Leifa herself had to fight. It was truly a state of despair. All their actions have led to complete failure, and hope is almost gone. But suddenly, 3 powerful warriors appear. Their power does not belong to Noblewood. They are so strong that they are able to defeat a hunter. They have no prejudice against half-elves. They are Gelian, Camilla, and Reeve. For Leifa, they are the last hope, like a miracle sent down to them by the gods. The king understands that he must not give in to emotions. He must not be consumed by unacceptable thoughts. If he, as a king, uses inappropriate tactics, all his subjects will be in danger. Gelian asks what they can get in return if they fulfill her request and free the captives by force. Mrs. Leifa thinks, if there is some kind of prize, that changes things. He wants to have something for his people in Archimaira so that they understand his actions. Gelian asks her to come up with a reason so that he can help her. The girl is determined. She is ready to give her all to save Lilifa. Confident in her lineage, she says that the kidnapped queen of Noblewood was her great-grandmother. The current king of Noblewood is a direct descendant of the royal line. It is rare to be a descendant of royal blood. Lifa also mentions that she is an untouched girl and believes that this will give her an additional advantage in negotiations. Gelian is outraged by her words. He asks what will happen to Latestwood then. Lifa replies that Lilifa will take her place and Venri will help her. The girl believes that Lilifa can become a worthy queen. Lifa turns to Gelian, stating that after the deal he can demand anything from her. She is ready to transfer all her rights to him and satisfy any of his wishes. The girl, kneeling, asks him to save her friends. Lifa's closest associates fall to their knees behind her, except Venri. She lowers her head and closes her eyes. The young man looks at the half-elves bowing before him with surprise. Gelian, reflecting on the fact that the lady bows her head to a simple traveler, realizes that a ruler should not act like that. In his understanding, this is tantamount to renouncing his powers. It is vital for a ruler to put himself above others. Looking at the girl, who bowed so low that her cheek touched the ground, he concluded that she preferred to do this in front of her subjects. Lifa, in his opinion, deliberately bowed her head in the very center of the village so that everyone could see it for the sake of saving her people. Gelian realizes that, as a king, he must take responsibility for his orders. The young man understands that his position is now precarious, and taking part in the showdowns of other countries was a stupid decision. At the very beginning, Reeve was just a weak monster, but he didn't get rid of her, but helped her grow. The girl believes that she should not talk about how they should hunt the weak. It would be an insult to Mr. Gelian. She is sure that she should not follow the principle of the strong absorb the weak. Reeve believes in the laws created by Mr. Gelian. The laws created in Archimaira are based on justice. Gelian turns to Reeve, Camilla, and Eltina, saying that he wants to discuss an important matter with them. The girls listen to him attentively. He confirms Lifa's request. Lim Latestwood on the creation of a rescue squad from their country. Gelian explains that since the establishment of the state in Latestwood, ideas of mutual aid and protection of the weak have flourished. All the inhabitants have an unwavering spirit and do not give up until the very end. Gelian notes that their ideology is very similar to their own. So, from a long-term strategic standpoint, he thinks they should build a good relationship with Latestwood. The young man invites the girls to voice their objections, but they remain silent. Reeve, Camilla, and Eltina don't object. They completely agree with him. The young man thinks that this is wonderful and makes a decision. He extends his hand to the Queen of Latestwood, asking for her hand. Lifa is confused and asks what he means by this. Gelian replies that he wants to tell her the whole truth about himself. The young man wants to tell her his real name. On this very day, they become brothers with the people of Latestwood. He says that his name is Gelian Ed Ursanok, and he is the ruler of the magical kingdom of Archimaira. The hero invites the girl to Archimaira, a kingdom in another world. Crowds of people gather in the square in front of the royal castle. People hurry and talk about the latest news and the speech that their king will make. The giants are asked to be careful and not to destroy the houses. The second corps is keeping order. The people are asked not to approach the military corps. Those with supervision are advised to move to the back rows. Eltina approaches her and asks with interest if she wants anything. The Queen of Latestwood refuses and thanks her for her concern. The balcony offers a magnificent view of the city. Lifa tells Eltina that she had guessed from the very beginning that Gelian was not just a traveler, but she could not even imagine that such a huge country existed. The girl listens to her attentively. Eltina expresses admiration for its magnificence. She tells that only the king and 3 creatures participated in the creation of the country. It was a small fox beastman and a low-ranking cat. At first, it was a very ordinary house. Eltina continues that they didn't even have weapons, and the expedition against the wandering goblin became a real test for them, in which they won with the help of an old sword. The king later melted it down and turned it into a short sword with a special engraving. Eltina tells Leif that they have learned from those difficult days. Every day was filled with battles. Gradually, the king began to gain supporters. Together, they fought with all their might for a single cause. After 120 years, having experienced many victories and defeats, Archimaira became the strongest kingdom. Mrs. Lifa clarifies whether 20 years have really passed. Eltina smiles and confirms that this year, the kingdom celebrates 150 years since its creation. Their country will enter a new era. To the people of Archimaira, Gelian walks through the line of guards, his cloak fluttering as he walks. Gelian's boots clicked on the polished parquet as he walked confidently toward the center of the podium. Finally, he stopped in front of the assembled group. In the town square, the army of guards held their breath in anticipation of his speech. The common people were eagerly awaiting the start of the royal speech. The soldiers stood at attention, and Reeve watched the king with curiosity. Finally, Gelian began his speech. He addressed the citizens of his country, thanking them for their presence. The king reported that they and their capital were moved to another location due to unknown circumstances, and unfortunately, only the castle and capital were teleported while the entire surrounding area was lost. Gelian explained that what surrounded them now was the unknown, in other words, another world. He expressed a desire to learn more about it. All the residents of Archimaira, gathered in the square, listened attentively to his speech. He pointed out that they were in absolute isolation from the outside world and called those present the only population of the country. The king informed his subjects that he had no way to return them to the old world. The population density in the capital had increased dramatically, and Gelian received information that food supplies would only last for a couple of months. The commanders of his corps, standing motionless, caught his every word. Gelian continued, reporting that it had become known that the forest surrounding them was full of dangers. This area was inhabited by terrible monsters. It's a pretty scary time for them, and Gelian knows nothing about why they were teleported. They've lost their homeland and most of their population, leaving only 1/100th of what it was before. In his heart, the conviction grew that this could be the end of Archimaira. The corps commanders pondered his words, and clouds floated above the sloping tiled roofs of the houses. Gelian asked if there were any of those present who thought the same way as he did, and he wondered why they had such thoughts. The king is going to explain to them why they are all here today. He tells them that 2 days ago, a turning point in the life of their country took place. They celebrated the 150th anniversary of the creation of their state. Gelian turns to his subjects and asks if they will allow this pride to be taken away from them. The crowd chants, "No." They are so proud because they have been through so many trials over these 150 years. By their own strength, they have survived wars, natural disasters, and other adversities, and even succeeded in trials sent by the gods. The young man reminds us that today, 8 elite main corps have gathered here, possessing everything necessary to maintain their dignity. Despite the critical situation that arose during the heyday of their state, he is confident in their strength. Gelian notes that Archimaira is very strong, and that is why they have gathered here today, to fight the challenges of fate. He calls on his proud people to shout with all their might in agreement with him, ready to stand up for the defense of their state. The crowd responds with a loud shout. The king announces that their country is not alone in facing such trials. He tells of a people in the northeast called the Latest Wood. The ideas of this people are in many ways similar to their own, and they have taught him many new things. However, Latest Wood does not have a large army, and for this he wishes to express his gratitude to them. Lady Lifa listens attentively from the balcony. Gelian reports that the people of Lateswood are under the oppression of terrible conditions, but even this has not broken their steadfastness. He adds that Latestwood is being attacked by a pure-blooded elven kingdom called Noblewood. They routinely oppress peoples of both elven and human blood. They despise the low races of human descent and kill the people of Latestwood. In addition to destroying the villages, the elves took the little princess and several hundred villagers as hostages. Gelian informs the people of Noblewood's terms, the exchange of the kidnapped people for their commander, Eltina, aside. The girl accepts this steadfastly, without objecting to her king. The king shares his intentions to accept the people of Latewood as his brothers and sisters, and his decision to attack the cruel country of Noblewood. Gelian has no desire to give in to the enemy. He emotionally calls his people to fight. They will go against this illogical cruelty, because this is how their people have lived all this time. Gelian will try to enter into a dialogue with Noblewood, but if a battle is destined to happen, it will be a large-scale battle. He warns against relaxing, since no one knows the military potential of the enemy. That is why he decided to entrust the conduct of this war entirely to his magical creatures. The commanders of the guard army listen to him attentively. The young man calls his commanders Archimairas, monsters. The king waits for an answer from them. He asks who will be his eyes. Riv tells him that they will be the eyes of Archimaira. They will become the first sacred army and will be the eyes of their great king. The king asks who will be the claws that will tear the enemy apart instead of the weak king. The soldiers raise their blades, proclaiming that they will be the claws of Archimaira. The giants shout that they will be the second sacred army and promise to be the claws of their heroic king. Gelian asks who will be the mane that shows their dignity. Eltina replies that they will be the mane. The girl says that they will become the third sacred army and promises to become the mane of the smartest king. The king asks who will cast the spells in place of their weak king. Ceres, kneeling, replies that they will become the fourth holy army and the language of Archimaira. Gelian asks where are the hands that will break down all the walls. Gardy, showing his huge fists, readily proclaims that he will become the hands of the Archmaire and will be the fifth holy army. The soldiers give a war cry, and the king continues. He asks where the ears are that will hear all the information. Camilla, soaring into the air, shouts that they will become the sixth sacred army and the ears that will learn all the information for their honest king. The guard army chants yes in general agreement. Gelian asks who will be the legs that will support everything instead of their king. The commander of the 7th Corps, Robin, excitedly promises that they will be the feet of Archimaire and the 7th sacred army of their leader, the king. Then Gelian again addresses all the inhabitants of the kingdom. He asks who will become the wings that rule the great sky. The soldiers of the 8th Corps unanimously declare that they will be the wings of Archimaira. The leader of the Sky Dragon Squad, Nogard, says that they will become the 8th Sacred Army and the wings of their proud king. The king, approving, says that they have their own opinions and asks them to guide him. The king orders the entire army to advance. He calls for the destruction of all enemies and the rescue of all allies, leaving no one behind. Gelian claims that their strength is unrivaled. The king's speech inspired the army. The soldiers shouted the words, courage and bravery. On the balcony, bathed in light, stands Queen Leaf. She witnesses the monsters of Archimaira's kingdom utter their first war cry in this world. An incredible scene unfolds before her eyes, and she ponders that Archimaira's kingdom may change the laws of this world. The captive half-elves were in a musty barn. A rat ran along a ceiling beam. Lilifa was bandaging a wounded man who apologized for not being able to protect her and allowing them to be captured. She asked him not to move, otherwise the wounds might open up. The young man replied that he was more concerned about her condition. The girl assures him that she is fine. She asks him to calm down and lie down. She is informed that Her Majesty the Queen is not in sight. She is probably just somewhere else. Lilifa is sure that her older sister and the traveler will come for them soon, but for now they will have to be patient for a while. They ask her if they can trust the traveler. The girl is convinced of it. She thinks that Gelian is just an amazing person. He saved her older sister from the hunter commander. Lilitha remembers that he promised to help them to the best of his ability. The guards come for the girl and call her an unclean girl and order her to come out. She reassures the other girls that she will be fine, and they ask the guard what he is going to do with their mistress. The guard laughs and says that they will be useful later. Lilitha promised them that she would return and asked them not to worry. She assures that her older sister will definitely come for them. The girl believed that everything would be fine and they would return home alive. Meanwhile, Gelian, the commanders of his military corps, Eltina and Riv, and Lady Lifa were walking through the forest. The young man studied the virtual map and thought that their performance had been a success. Now the country's inhabitants were united against Noblewood. He still had no information about the enemy's forces, and he should not relax. Lifa warned Gelian that they would soon enter Noblewood's domain. He asked if the elves could be trusted. The king doubted that they would simply hand over the prisoners. She tried to calm him down, saying that they had sworn an oath in the name of a sacred tree that time. This oath is passed down from generation to generation among the elves. Elves who broke such an oath were considered to have defiled the name of God and became enemies of all other elves. Breaking such an oath was impossible to forgive. The heroes approached the city wall, surrounded by defensive peaks. Elven soldiers stood on the watchtowers. Gelian reminded his commanders not to attack without his orders under any circumstances. Reeve and Eltina agreed. The elves noticed that they had not fled and had come anyway. One of them asked the captain if he should take them to the commander-in-chief, Saraven. Lady Lifa addressed them, saying that she had brought the traveler and his companions. The elven captain laughed and ordered them to pass. Gelian looks around and is struck by the sight of the ruined buildings. There are pieces of boards, reinforcement, and broken furniture lying everywhere. The young man asks Leaf if these ruins were really a city. The girl bows her head sadly. The elf captain commands them not to stop and to follow him. The heroes are led through the city square and finally appear before the commander-in-chief Hunter. The elf says they came faster than he expected, which is commendable. Gelian looks him up and down. The boy asks if the hunter is really a representative of Noblewood and if he will negotiate with him. The commander-in-chief wonders what negotiations are being discussed. Gelian tells him that they came at Latestwood's request. He adds that no one forced them, they came of their own free will. The young man asks the hunter why his country needs the High Elves. He suggests that it is because of their ability to use their inherent magic. Gelian thinks that they can work together peacefully, but it will be up to him. First, we need dialogue. If the issue can be resolved peacefully, then it is not scary to make small concessions. Violence should be the last resort. The hero believes that if it is possible to bring back Lilitha and the others without shedding blood, then that would be great. The commander-in-chief listens to him in silence, and then bursts into wild laughter. The elf laughs and laughs and laughs without stopping. Then he suddenly stops and tells Gelian that he is a pathetic man and does not know his place. He arrogantly announces to the youth that they are High Elves, a pure-blooded race, the founders of the Elven race. Then the hunter turns to Eltina. He wants to hear something from her. The girl is not going to say anything special. She points to Gelian, meaning that he is the one conducting the negotiations. A recent incident has made the elf realize what amazing magical power she possesses. He thinks she is so strong that she can defeat even him. These spells are used only by the High Elves, the founders of the line. The hunter asks why Eltina obeys a man, since people are a barbaric, inferior race. The girl does not deny that she belongs to the Elven race, but her values and theirs are too different. The commander-in-chief is surprised. He does not understand how one can forget one's elven dignity. The elf smiles disgustingly. Then he says that it even plays into their hands. The elf stretches his hand up. At the same moment, a creature with huge clawed paws rushes down from the sky. The hunter has summoned a dragon. Gelian and the girls freeze in place. They can't take their eyes off him. Lilitha can't believe that this is really a dragon fairy. The elf, smiling, says that even though she is corrupted, she has some elven blood in her. He sees that Lilitha knows everything. The girl screams in despair. How could they remove the seal, and are they in their right minds? Gelian asks her what is the matter and what kind of dragon it is. Lilitha explains that an elven epic, passed down from generation to generation, describes a dragon that was said to have been given to the elves by an ancient god. Long ago, when the world was on the verge of destruction, he used his power and helped in the fight against the demon king. But it is said that after the war, the ancient elves sealed him away. The commander-in-chief Hunter chuckled again. Hunter says that since she already knows everything herself, he won't have to explain it for long. The dragon looms over them. The elf turns to Gelian, intending to tell him something. He tells him that to achieve something great, one needs the corresponding power, and power always comes at a price. The commander-in-chief tells him that the dragon fairy's power is unmatched, but as payment for it, he will accept nothing but the flesh and blood of a race with noble magical power. The dragon needs the flesh and blood of the elves. That is why the ancient elves sealed the dragon fairy. Eltina listens silently, frowning. The elf states that Noblewood is in dire need of his power. They must undo the humiliation that the human race inflicted on them 100 years ago. When the fairy dragon was released from the seal, he was extremely hungry. He was not in a condition to fight right away. The hunter continues his story. Naturally, the wise elves of Noblewood were prepared for this. For this day's sake, all this time they had been deliberately letting live those who would become food for him. Gelian is amazed. He asks if the elves really allowed those who would later become food to live. He remembered the commander-in-chief's words, that the dragon fairy could only accept elven flesh and blood. The dragon eats only elves. The young man realizes with horror that for the last month the dragon fairy has been eating only half-elves. The hunter laughs and confirms his guess. Lilitha flares up, rushing to the commander-in-chief to ask what happened to her mother and her husband. It takes a lot of effort from Reeve to hold her back. He says that Lilitha's parents have long been in the dragon's stomach. But the elves miscalculated. They did not make good food because they had a lot of human blood in them. The best offering is the blood and flesh of the High Elves. Gelian cannot contain his anger. He demands the return of Queen Lilifei and the half-elves they kidnapped yesterday. The hunter swore an oath in the name of the sacred tree and must now return the hostages. The elf understands that Lifa told him about the sacred tree and that Gelian is so obedient because he wants to return Lilifa. He gives a sign to one of the soldiers and he brings him the body. The soldier calls the girl to him. She runs, stretching her hands forward. A ring sparkles on her little finger. Gelian kneels down beside the tiny body. He notices the ring on her little finger. That's all the dragon left of her. The elf laughs, saying that he returned the girl as promised. The young man's face turns gray from what he sees. Lifa throws herself at her sister's body with a scream, tears streaming from her eyes. An oath in the name of a sacred tree is indeed absolute and unconditional, but not when sworn to a half-elf. The commander-in-chief says there is no need to honor the oath given to half-bloods. He laughs, remembering the expression on Lilifa's face. The elf says that Lifa's sister believed until the very end that she would be saved. Gelian and the girls freeze in place, as if turning to stone. The hunter laughs. His face is disfigured by the grimace of a madman. Shaking off his stupor, the young man rushes at the commander-in-chief. Reeve and Eltina hold back the grief-stricken Lifa. The soldiers at the border exchange glances, their attention drawn to a distortion deep in the forest. The commander-in-chief hunter laughs in the young man's face. Gelian finally realized what a fool he had been. The young man again remembers the scene on the shore, and in his memories he sees a ring on the girl's little finger. He thought that they would be able to talk and find a common language, but he was wrong. The hero understands that in front of him are no longer elves or even people. Gelian screams at the top of his lungs, calling them beasts that bring misfortune to everyone around them. From that moment on, they are no longer human to him. The soldiers notice a magical force engulfing the entire city, like a closing barrier. All 8 corps of the army are ready to attack and await the order of their king. The elves wonder what kind of army is in front of them. An order is heard to report this to the commander-in-chief and contact the country. They understand that they are now under attack and panic. Gelian declares that this is not a war, but an extermination of parasites. He gives the order to gnaw the ugly creatures to death.